Yeah, we can definitely we can talk. We'll talk a little bit about the Indian election that happened, so like just some of the aftermath, and then we can branch off into a few different subjects as well.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yeah.
All right, sir. We are live. Thank you for joining me once again, Arjun. It's good to see you again. And so, last time we talked was in the middle of the was right in the middle of the elections that was going on. And as we were talking, there was some violence that was breaking out. And since then,
Yeah.
things have just started. There's been even bigger shit shows since then. A lot of people have ended up. There's been a lot of violence. A lot of people have ended up dead just over these at these polling stations. So why
Uh-huh.
don't you fill us in at everything that has happened over the last couple days since the violence broke out?
Okay. The violence was basically in the rural areas that happened. And so far, 26 people died. 11 people died just on Tuesday, the day after the polling. But now the violence is under control because the Supreme Court ordered 573 polling booths to be repolled, and heavy central security forces presence was there. So there was no more violence today, as much as I have heard. But we'll have to wait for tomorrow's paper. But yeah, and this has been a PR disaster for the current West Bengal chief minister because of all the polling, because of this polling madness. Yeah.
Yeah, I was noticing that too, that after this ended up happening, there seemed to be some manipulation going on in the news because you had to show me an article where it was talking at first, it was showing that 17 people had been killed, but then right underneath it, the byline was saying how was it the chief officer that was saying that only 6 people had been killed?
Yeah, that's the official line being taken by the West Bengal government. But now it has been proved false because of all the good work done by good reporters from different news outlets that were on the ground. So in that way, it has been like the media has worked really well because like even a year back, the current chief minister of West Bengal had so much power and she used to intimidate media houses and all so much that they wouldn't report on such things. Like there have been cases of several riots, maybe 10 miles from where I currently live, where the media, there was a media blackout on such events. There were outright riots between Hindus and Muslims. Sectarian violence happened, and the media won't speak about it because she was intimidating the media. So yeah.
Yeah, and you were mentioning that it happened to be more in the rural areas, but also it happened to be in a lot of the Muslim-dominated areas where the violence was breaking out, and it seemed pretty clear that it was coming from the left-wing parties because the BJP have been dominating a lot of these areas recently, and even from those areas, they were relatively civil. What was going on over there, but it was always in these areas that was dominated by the chief minister where the violence was breaking out. And considering how they're on their last legs, this seems pretty obvious where the violence is coming from. It's coming from the left. But since then, you're saying that all the violence is starting to die down. And was there a revote? You were saying?
Yeah, today was the Supreme Court ordered repolling of these for about nearly 600 of these polling booths. So that to just to mitigate the effects of yesterday's violence. So yeah, yeah,
Well, it's glad to see that you're doing okay because that was one of my biggest concerns when everything was happening was the fact that I was worried that maybe it hit your area. I'm glad to see that it didn't. But yeah, like I couldn't believe how bad it got. And there were bomb threats. There were bomb threats. You said a minister stabbed somebody. Like a minister stabbed somebody. I couldn't believe that
yeah,
it's actually gotten this bad. So
yeah. The closest, yeah. Go ahead. Finish.
oh no, please go ahead. I'll finish up after.
Yeah, so the minister stabbed somebody. That was like the cake. That was the cake. And the fact is that the closest violence that happened was maybe about 20 miles out from where I live. So it's not in the inner city, but it was there, definitely there in the suburbs. Like especially people from the working class and all, they felt the pinch of these riots. So and many of them, including people who I currently employ, even they like ran away to their home villages and hometowns. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. You're mentioning that, and probably put a big shutdown on a lot of businesses and a lot of people in there because they were even worried to go out in the to go out and in case of the violence. And that's something that right now, at least, we don't have to worry about too much over here in the Western countries. It's like there's violence, but all in all, you don't really hear about too much violence at the polling station. But it seems to be that underneath this chief minister that things have gotten out of hand. But this is what ends up happening when you're on your last legs, because as we know, that 21 out of the 28 ridings are owned by Modi and the BJP. So with the way that you've told me in the past that Modi has destroyed the left, we've seen how violence can break out when they got their backs against the wall. A lot of ways, this is what's happened in America with groups like Antifa. They felt that when Trump came in, their backs were against the wall or they're losing their ground. That they're losing their ground. So the only option is violence. But you don't see this from the other side too. You're not really seeing the violence from the conservative groups as much. You're not seeing them from the BJP nearly as much. So what do you think is the real reason for the violence? Is it part of the left wing and doctrine, or what's the reason for all this violence that's breaking out with the Congress Party right now?
See, the violence is all about the control. They're losing control. This is a battle for survival. Like, it's the thing about the cornered mouse. A cornered mouse lashes out the hard, like the worst. When it is the most cornered, that is when the cornered mouse lashes out in any way it can. So that is basically what is happening right now with these left oriented political parties, the left party spectrum. That is what is happening, because BJP is basically jumping into their turf and taking over what they have for many decades worked to sort of build up, and by whatever means, illegal or legal. So the fact is, BJP in a very BJP is and the best part is that BJP is doing it legally, because BJP is just rally. They just hold political rallies, and when they hear the prime minister is going to hold a rally, like vast amount of people just show up. That recently there was a rally in West Bengal at the beginning of this year, done by the BJP and the RSS, which is the parent organization of the BJP. The BJP is the political arm of the RSS, which is a right-wing conservative sort of social and volunteer organization. So, and they held rallies, and anywhere upwards of 500,000 people showed up at each rally. So that is a very, and when the chief minister or any of her ministers holds a rally, nowhere close to that number, like less than even 100,000 people show up. So this is a big problem for them, and it's a battle for survival. And but in the West Bengal chief minister's case, it is probably the worst example. It is probably the worst example.
Because as I've been hearing, this has been the worst amount of violence that we've seen during India during the election that I think ever, actually, or at least in modern day history that we're talking. There's never been this sort of violence that's been breaking out. And this has been happening all over the world, where we see the left is starting to lose ground. In fact, whenever I see any sort of left-wing rallies or politicians that get together, it's very, very rare to see conservatives breaking into the area and trying to disrupt the event. They may protest in their designated protest areas, but all in all, they seem to handle the protest pretty well. They'll stand off to the side, they'll shout at each other, blah, 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 blah. But constantly, you just see whenever it's the other way around, the left is breaking into these events. They're trying to disrupt them as much as possible. And that could be whether that's Antifa, but even a lot of times it can just be independent people. Recently, Dave Rubin was giving a talk at, I believe it was a college. And so in the middle of his speech, one woman just started, she had like a jar with, I don't know, maybe she had some coins or something in it, and she just starts shaking it. She's just shaking it to make noise, and you disrupt everything. And Dave Rubin's literally sitting there like, do you want to have a conversation? Like, come on, I want to talk to you. I'd love to talk to you. She didn't say a word to him. She just sat there shaking the jar and trying to disrupt the whole thing. Like, she didn't care about having a conversation. And this is actually one thing that I found that moved me a few years ago when I identified more on the left wing, when I was more of a liberal. This is one of the things that moved me away from it, is that for me, people always told you, you got to listen to the both sides. You got to get the opinion of both sides. So that's when I started branching out. I said, okay, I'll listen to more conservative ideas. And one thing they always brought up that I didn't believe for the first month or two was the fact they said, like, the left doesn't want to have a conversation. They're never willing to talk. But as I paid more attention to this, I started to see it. I started to see just all this disruption, all this chaos, but they never want to sit down and actually challenge the ideas. And that's because many of the ideas these days that are put forward by the left would just fall apart underneath a little bit of scrutiny. While I think that the left is the left brings up some points when they're talking about when they bring up some of the inequality issues in the past, that has been effective, because if you let inequality grow too much, then you will have civil disobedience from the people. So that has been necessary. But as we've moved much more to a much fairer culture, the ideas of the left begin to fall apart. So when you actually underneath a little bit of scrutiny, their whole platform just falls apart. And so this is why they don't want any conversations whatsoever.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, and I don't think there's very much more I can add to that. But the fact is, yeah, they are see, the people. What I can say is, yeah, people who do the grunt work for the left, like all these guys who show up to these events and start making noise, and just for the sake of making noise. Yeah, these are the people who are basically doing the grunt work. They're just like zombies. They're not really part of the left. They think they are, and the left leadership just uses such people. But I don't think they are really part of the actual left. Because if ever the left does take over, I think these people will be the first ones who will be like euthanized, like under some Lebensborn kind of scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been noticing that too, is that they've just been losing a lot of support lately. I mean, now they're saying that in America, the Democratic Party has had its lowest amount of support it's ever had. So this blue wave that they're promising in 2018 is going to completely fall apart. And Stan in the chat he just worded it perfectly. He says the left wants war while virtue signaling about peace. And I've seen this constantly. Like, don't get me wrong, there's going to be war hawks on all sides. I mean, there'll be definitely conservative war hawks without a doubt. And I've even seen some in my country that could easily be considered war hawks as well. But time and time again, they're the ones trying to say, like, we want peace. But then you look at what they actually vote for, and it's not that at all. I mean, there was almost, when we were looking back to the Iraq War, there was almost universal consent with the Democrats about going to the Iraq War. And then when everything fell apart in the Iraq War, they started saying, well, we never wanted war in the first place. It was always the right wings. It was the Republicans that want the war. But constantly we're seeing this. And in fact, a lot of times the violence is right in what they're talking about. Because when Trump came in, we were hearing about it's okay to punch a Nazi now, I mean, I guess it clearly started when someone punched Richard Spencer and called him a Nazi. But since then, just about everyone is considered a right-wing radical. Just about everyone is considered a Nazi. I mean, even things that I've said would be considered probably would get me labeled as some sort of right-wing radical, even though a lot of the times I'm just trying to stick to the the stats as much as possible. I know there's definitely times I've been wrong, but more or less, it doesn't matter what the facts are. It only matters, like, it really is feeling it over facts with the left these days. And because of it, we're seeing justification for this violence. I mean, I'm sure this was probably the narrative that was going on during this election. You probably heard that a lot about the BJP were probably like a terrible right-wing party that needs to be stopped. Yeah. Otherwise, they're going to completely destroy the culture, right?
Yeah. Yeah. See, BJP was demonized. See, there was recently a tweet where somebody compiled the kind of rhetoric that was coming from the left and the rest of the opposition parties, especially from the Congress party, which is the main opposition party to the BJP, and it's a socialist party. They were saying things like he's the dealer of death, he's a chai wala, he's a tea seller, he's unfit for the office, he's low caste, he's this, he's just a low human being, he's an insect, he's this, he's that. Things like rhetoric like that means unheard of in Indian politics before that. Like such degrading and despicable rhetoric that was coming from the left. Like I'm sure you would be able to find quite a few parallels to that in your own politics, in American politics, etc. So it was, and the funny thing is, because of Modi's strategy, what has ended up happening is he's been able to sort of turn it and flip it on these guys now. Now, every time these guys attack Modi, he just plays the victim and he says, "Oh, but look, these guys have said such despicable things to me. Just because I'm from a poor background, my mother was a washerwoman. I am a tea seller. I used to sell tea at at a railway station when I was a kid. So basically, these things that they're calling me, they're actually calling you, and that has just worked, and it has backfired on the opposition so badly that people have taken offense to the fact that one of them has been called so many such degrading names. So yeah, so it has worked out well for Modi in that sense.
And it's funny, you were just saying about certain things, like they were calling him like an insect, for instance, eh? That's funny because that was actually something I noticed. I mean, they were going back in history now, but when the October Revolution happened in Russia, and not Stalin, Lenin ended up taking over, this was almost exactly how he started talking about others on the other side immediately. And a good example of this was when he was talking about the first one, I think he labeled as insects and parasites, where the religious group, he was saying that that's exactly what they are. They're insects and parasites. They need to be stopped. But this was exactly what ended up continuing on in different fields, you know? They ended up saying this about the farmers, the Ukrainian farmers, who ended up, and then for that reason, they need to be stopped. We need to go and take the land from these farmers because they're trying to repress all you other working class people. And what ended up happening out of it was they ended up having the famine. And I think something like 30, maybe not 30 million Russians died from that. I'm not sure. But there were millions of Russians who ended up dying just from famine in and of itself. And this is also why I think violence is acceptable on the left, because one thing about the right is the right wing and conservatism is that it wants to hold the standards and values that we have now. And on the other side, the idea of left-wing politics is laxing the standards, you know, letting more people of it, like, is not a big deal anymore in this modern day society. And Stan just corrected me. It was about 11 million that ended up dying due to the starvation. So yeah, because of that, so it's a lax in morals that we're seeing from the left. And we can see this in policies that is being pushed right now. In my country, Justin Trudeau has just allowed people who have been sex offenders, as long as they get a pardon, he's allowing them to work with the most vulnerable groups of people. He's allowing them to work with children. He's allowing them to work with the elderly. And we're just seeing this giant lack of morals and giant laxing of standards coming from the left-wing politics, which is why I think it actually happens to be so dangerous. Sure, some things I think it's okay to lax your standards on, but for the most part, the stuff that they do want to lax the standard on actually will cause more detriment in the future than actually more positivity.
Yeah, see, the lowering of the standards of morals is not a new thing for the left, because they don't believe in any kind of morality as such, that they don't believe in right and wrong. They only believe in what needs to be done. So in that sense, the lack of morals on their side is not a surprising thing. But it has to be countered effectively, and an effective strategy by the conservatives needs to be found out sooner rather than later, preferably sooner, that a counter to these such social measures needs to be found. A measure which sort of reassures the people and sort of battles any sort of corruption or immorality that sets in. But so far, I'm like, though I have very little knowledge about this, but in my reading of Western politics, I'm still yet to see any kind of movement that sort of is countering this social rot, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree with you. Is the one thing is right now is we do need a more effective strategy, and I think actually people like Gadsad and people like Modi have actually shown us what we need to do. And what we need to do is we need to flip the narrative on them, because someone like Gad Saad, he's Lebanese Jewish, who was forced out of his home during the Lebanese Revolution, and his parents were like, his whole entire family was threatened with death. Now, when somebody comes at him, and because he holds more conservative views, when someone comes at him and they try and tell him about how terrible he is, his first strategy is to play the victim like that, the way that the left would. He's like, are you coming at me, an overweight Lebanese Jew who was forced out of my home? How could you do that? That's just so hateful, And time again, the left has shown themselves that they don't actually believe what they talk about. I mean, two things actually over the last couple days I've seen, which is just proves this, is that I was browsing Twitter the other day, and I was browsing Twitter the other day, and I came across an article. I only read a little bit of it, but it was talking about this black guy that was sitting in a restaurant, I believe. It was the Cheesecake Factory. Yes, it was the Cheesecake Factory, and he was wearing one of Donald Trump's Make America Great Again hats. And he got assaulted by the staff. The staff assaulted him, and they were even like calling him the N-word and everything like that, because he was holding because he was wearing the MAGA hat. Plus, on top of this, we hear many things like black conservatives, they'll call them porch monkeys and all sorts of other things. Another thing was that, do you know the independent journalist Tim Pool?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, he ended up retweeting something that somebody said, and they ended up saying, the tweet that this person put out, they said, like, take your family to Walmart and then take them into the bathrooms and tell them that to clean the toilets for $7.25 an hour, because I think that's minimum wage in America right now. And when they complain about it, tell them that that's why you shouldn't be against immigrants, because they'll do the jobs they don't do. And Tim Pool's response to this is, why is it that everybody's first idea is that these immigrants are going to be cleaning toilets? And I completely agree with them. It's like this idea that I think they say, well, they're going to do the jobs that Americans don't want, like pick our fruit, clean our toilets. But by their standards, apparently these immigrants can't do any better. They can't go on to be doctors. They can't go on to be firefighters. They can't do anything else but clean the toilets. And you really don't hear that from the other side. In fact, a lot of time, without talking about diversity, the right wing will bring in diversity. Because right now, I'm with the elections that's coming up in my province right now, when we have Doug Ford for the Conservative Party, we have Kathleen Wynne for the Liberal Party, and Andrea Horwath for the New Democratic Party. The New Democrats and the Liberals are constantly talking about diversity. We want diversity, blah, 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 blah. But if you look at Doug Ford's base, without even uttering the word diversity, if you look around in the crowd, it's black people, white people, Arabs, Asians, and these are all people that support him. And in fact, my wife, she just started school this week, and she has a lot of immigrants who are with. She has a lot of immigrants that she's in school with, and a lot of them happen to be Filipino. Well, just about most of these immigrants are supporting Doug Ford in the election. Now, I don't know if they can necessarily vote, but they are at least saying that between all the candidates, they're supporting the conservative. They're supporting Doug Ford because they're tired of this whole of getting put in racial barriers. And one thing I've said before is that the idea that these left-wing politics have of putting people in different camps actually causes more friction. A year ago, there was a couple different leadership races for the parties. There was leadership for the Conservative Party. This is federal now. We're talking federal politics. There was a leadership race for the Conservatives, and then a few months later, they had the elections for the New Democratic Party. And I ended up looking over both. And the one thing that proved this to me was the fact for the Conservatives, they were saying that they needed the signatures of 500 card-carrying conservatives that would support them. That's it. They just needed the 500 signatures. And I think the NDP only needed 300 or something like that. However, you needed half of them had to be female, a certain percentage had to be from the LGBT community, a certain percentage had to be from a visible minority group, a certain percentage had to be from a native group. So when I was looking at it, I said, well, on one side, we have one big blue unified conservative party. But on the left wing side, if you were to color code these, you would have the New Democrat Party However, in the middle of all that, you are literally grouping everybody up into different sections, into different groups. And now that's just causing friction among all the groups right now because they're just rubbing against each other and they're not really a unified party. And this is seen many, many times because the left can never seem to, they can unify for a little bit, but sooner or later, this ends up falling apart. And I think it's just because they want everybody to be in different groups. And, they're the ones that say that conservatives want to divide, the right wing wants to divide. But meanwhile, they're really playing the divisive politics. It's all about a sleight of hand, It's that idea that you say something and then you do the opposite. That's really what it seems to be for me with all these groups.
Stan seems to be like he has some strong views about the NDP. And
he's not exactly wrong, man. He still calls them communist Marxists. He is not wrong. They hold a lot of communist / Marxist views, so he's not wrong when he says that.
Dude, with Jagmeet Singh wearing $5,000 to $10,000 suits, some kind of Marxist they are. So the fact is, yeah, as far as the quota system goes, some of the most vocal opponents to the quota system that you will find is from these kind of minorities and different gender groups who have actually worked hard to gain a high position in society. They will be the most vocal sort of opponents of the quota system because reservation is a complete antithesis to their entire life's work. They have worked extremely hard. These guys from say from an immigrant community or from some religious minority group or some gender minority group, these people would have worked extremely hard to get to some high position in society, and then they will see that other people from their own communities getting a quota and then just sailing through life without having to work hard and continue to play the victim. So yeah, it has some sociological ramifications more than people understand at first. But yeah, a quota system never helps. It never helps.
Yeah. A quota system actually it does the complete opposite, because when you have a quota, you have to meet that quota under any means necessary. And when you have to meet it under any means necessary, you're willing to lax your standards in order to meet that, which means you're not necessarily hiring on or bringing in the best people. You're just bringing people on based on, say, their gender or skin color, which means that you don't actually care about their ideas. You don't actually care about what they have to bring to the table. You just want them next to you for that idea of diversity. But diversity shouldn't be forced. It should be one of those things that just happen if we're going to have a diverse society. It shouldn't be something that's based on quotas.
Yeah, it's like the token black guy concept from the movies, right? The token black guy dies first in the movies. It's like that. It's still racist and it doesn't help, and it doesn't do anything for any black actor working out there. So if that metaphor is used, yeah, the token black guy never ever, for that matter, token any guy never works. It has to be a bottom up empowerment from the grassroots level. Otherwise, diversity will never be a reality. It will just be a very superficial diversity. The inequalities will still sort of exist underneath the surface. Just if you scratch the surface, you will still see the inequality.
And the thing is, too, is I feel like everybody feels that every little bit of inequality is a bad thing, but that's not necessarily true. We're constantly profiling everybody. We're constantly discriminating against people in every aspect of what we do. I mean, for instance, such as a job, we constantly discriminate against certain people because they may not have the skills, they may not have the experience in order to be able to hold down the job, but that's completely acceptable. And even if we're talking about something such as much as bad as it might seem, but if we're talking about certain, like, people talk about like airports, how they can profile some people, well, as it might sound awful, but right now, if we're talking about who's more likely to commit a terrorist attack on the plane, I'm not like, yeah, I feel bad for those individual like Muslims who don't do anything wrong and are getting profiled. But the point is that there is a group out there right now that are committing these attacks. So there's a reason that we're going to profile people based on this. And even like, I'm not even opposed to getting profiled myself based on certain issues. Someone like Sam Harris has talked about how like he's actually in favor for profiling at airports, but he's also admitted that because of him and the way that I think he has some I think he may have like some families that are Arabic, so he has a little bit of features that are a little more Arabic, even though he's a white person, I think, but I think he has some like family that are Arabic. But he's even acknowledged that at an airport, he is more likely to get profiled, and he says he's okay with that because there's good reasons to do it. Now, there's not always, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's always good reasons to do it, but more often than not, people aren't coming in for racist means or sexist means is why they're profiling you. They have legitimate means, but constantly people on the left wing politics want to turn it into something more. They want to turn it into be about race or turn it about gender or one of these things. Mostly because it goes along their, I think mostly because it goes along with their politics more than anything. You know, it really strengthens their side if they can manage to push the argument in this direction.
See, the thing about what do you call it? I just had that. I'm sorry. The thing about being successful, or thing about even if you don't want to be profiled, the thing is that you as a representative of your community should be responsible, right? Responsibility is the key to sort of trust, right? If you are responsible, there will be trust. Like nobody profiles an Indian guy for being Indian. They profile. We might get called in for extra body cavity searches, but that's because we look similar to maybe Arabs by skin color. But then their aim is to sort of check what the Arabs are doing or what the Muslims are doing, not because we are Indians. Once they come to know we are Indians, they let us go. The fact is, that is the fact that is because Indians. I'm using the example of my own community. They have been responsible while living in other countries, so there is that trust. And vice versa. If anybody wants to be treated in a certain way and not be profiled or not be tracked, well, don't fly planes into buildings, right? If you don't fly, if you are responsible and don't fly planes into buildings, people will not be suspicious of you. That's like 2 + 2 = 4.
And we can even take this on a much more smaller level too and see how it applies, because when I was in high school, right across the street was a grocery store, and around lunchtime every day, it was only for the lunchtime that we went on, there would be a security guard waiting outside of the just in the lobby of the grocery store, and we always had to drop off our bags or this or that and the other. And you know, as students, we didn't really like it, but it made sense because constantly in the past, before this grocery store brought in the security guards, people from my school were they were stealing from there, you know? And of course, it wasn't everybody. In fact, most of the students that went in would pay for their stuff. But they had enough robberies from people from the school that they decided that they had to bring in a security guard. They had to profile the students from the high school that were coming in. And again, it didn't, even as me, someone like me who always pays their way, I think literally like when I was like, the only thing I ever stole in my life when I was like 5, and it wasn't even intentional. We used to go over to this small little corner store when I was a kid, and we'd rent a movie on Fridays for the local neighborhood kids, and we buy our candy. And I remember what ended up happening was I had this little piece of candy that I got every time, and I just wasn't sure if I wanted to get it that one time. You know, I was like, okay, I buy this every week. Maybe I want to do something different. So I ended up I'm a kid. I don't think I put it in my pocket just to be like, I'll think about it and then I'll put it back if I don't want it. When we left, I had it in my pocket. And when my parents saw that, they asked me about it. And I was like, oh crap, like we didn't pay for it. So my mom took me back the next day to the grocery store. We paid for it. We explained what happened and everything was good. But so, for someone like me who was going in this grocery store, I was saying, I've never really stolen anything or, just this one thing in my life. So why am I getting profiled? But it makes sense when you're older because they have to, because I was part of a group, even if I was not the individual doing the stealing, enough individuals from this group were doing the theft that the profiling was actually necessary. So it's not always a bad thing, although people always want to make it seem like it's a bad thing. And, it's the idea that it's like, well, it hurts my feelings. It does. And that shouldn't even be an argument, you know, like the idea that your feelings hurt shouldn't be an argument, because like it doesn't matter whether it is your feelings are hurt. If the facts are the facts, if the stats are saying one thing, then you have to take precautions in order to prevent anything from the future from happening. This is why we have so much airport security, and I'm the same way. I hate airport security. I hate going through that. And there's a possibility, excuse me, there's a possibility that at some point even somebody like me would have myself pulled over to the side, searched, have my bag searched. And I hate the idea of that, but I do realize it's a necessity. So this idea that profiling is always bad is just, to me, it's just a little ignorant to come from the left-wing politics. But you know, they'll just play anything that they'll just do anything, say anything that falls in with their side. And actually, because of this, I've noticed how inconsistent they can be. Again, we can go back to the idea of war, that you know, they're all against war, but oh, it's okay when we want to go to war, or violence is completely unnecessary, but oh, you're a Nazi, we gotta punch you now.
See, that's the thing. As I was talking about responsibility, that connects to this thing that the left today, because of its past activities, because of its attitudes today, rarely will you see ever that the left is setting the agenda, the political or social agenda. It is mostly, you will see that the conservative movement or the conservative parties or the conservative candidate is setting the agenda. They are saying, we want this change. Left is just reacting, is doing reactive politics. They're just reacting to what's going on. They're just reacting to any sort of change in whatever minority vote bank they're tapping into. They're just reacting. Reactive politics is never a long-term solution. That is a sign that your party is doomed. So yeah, responsibility and having the vision to set an agenda is very important to change the discourse of the country. Yeah.
And the other thing is too, is as I'm noticing that in their bid to seem tolerant, they're willing to push policies that are very damaging. Because one thing right now in our provincial elections is we've been hearing this a lot in America, but one thing that Andrea Horwath from the NDP ended up saying recently within the last couple of weeks is she wanted my province of Ontario to be a sanctuary province, because right now we're having a lot of illegal immigrants coming across the U.S. border. Since Trump took away the temporary protective status of the Haitians, we saw a large influx of Haitians that started heading towards the Canadian border. Nothing's really being done about it. You know, they're just being brought in. The RCMP, our highest police force, is arresting these people, but really all they do is they're taking their luggage, they're taking them off to be processed, and then they're letting them stay in the country. Right now, they say that less than 1% of these refugees that have gone across the border are actually getting sent home. And this doesn't really seem to matter about criminal records either. And because of it, what then ends up happening is they'll give them their permanent residency status, or at least temporary residency status in Canada. I think they're giving permanence right now. But what's happening because of that, when you get your permanent residency status, you're allowed to take advantage of the benefits in that country, in our country. So healthcare is a big one. And so the idea of a sanctuary city is just a terrible idea. Right now, I know San Diego was considered a sanctuary city, and we're just seeing a mass exodus over there because they're just saying, come on in, you know, come on in, all these illegal immigrants. But then the left is starting to see that their policies aren't working. But the problem with that too is then they're fleeing San Diego, they're fleeing California in large numbers. But what do? They go into more conservative areas, and they're willing to continue the process all over again. These same policies that have failed them time and time again, they're going to go into different areas and actually change the politics there, and they're just going to do it all over again. Right now, Florida was always a heavy Republican state for a long time, but they're in some of the demographic change, they're starting to show how the Democrats are starting to pick up more and more support in Florida, and that's because all these people have fled these areas because of their damaging policies, and now are just going to enact it all over again. So this idea
Florida. Yeah, but Florida. I'm sorry to interrupt you there.
Oh, go ahead.
Florida had all those immigrants coming in from Cuba also, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so obviously. So see, Stan seems to make a point about many of them being economic migrants. But those who are genuine economic migrants who are going to the Western countries, or for that matter, America or Canada, and making good on whatever economic goals they had, they would never be affected by any of these crises. Anybody who's a legal migrant who is doing well in society, is contributing and is well integrated, will never ever have a problem with any of these things, any of these policy changes that Trump seems to be making, right?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I'm seeing that too. And I think probably you just said it, that it's like they're contributing to the society. They come in legally, they go through the entire process, but then they're seeing as other people are being giving special they're giving special status. I remember a while ago, I think it was it was a question that I think it was Justin Trudeau received. But he was this one dude stood up and he was talking about all the immigrants that were coming across the border, these illegal immigrants that were allowed to stay. And he said, like, he ended up standing up. He says, well, I'm seeing a woman right now, and we would love to get married. But she has been going through the immigration process for 10 years. 10 years she'd been going across this immigration process, and she had been trying to get her citizenship in Canada. But meanwhile, all these people were coming across the border just claiming that, you know, they're asylum seekers and they're allowed to stay. And the idea, especially coming from America, that they're asylum seekers is a joke. I mean, America is one of the most prosperous countries in the world. So the idea that they're actually facing severe persecution where they need to leave America is absolute crap. Especially considering when it's something like when Trump took away the temporary protective status from people like Haitians. Well, it's a temporary protective status. Trump has every single right to take that away whenever he feels like it. The American government has every single right to take that away. But now they're also claiming that this is persecution now. And this is just... I was just going to go on to say that there's more... It's very obvious that they're coming for it as economic migrants rather than actually asylum seekers.
See, the Haitian thing, yeah, so, exactly. The Haitian thing is that they came in after the Haitian earthquake. They needed temporary, refugee status because their country had been hit by a natural disaster. The fact of the matter is that if in 7, 8, 10 years after the earthquake you have not made good, then you are not interested in making good, right? Because Trump changed the policy on spouses of H-1B visa holders from India as well. It means H-1B visa holders, most of which are Indians. And he changed the rules for the spouses they bring in under that scheme. But because Indians go 99%, 99.9% Indians enter US legally, they were very easily able to change the visa category status for their wives or spouses or whatever without any problems. They didn't have any problems, and they continue to live happily in the US today also. So, and this is just 2 months back. So that is the point of coming into the US or any other Western country legally. Because then if you are doing everything legally, then the government machinery can't touch you, right? And in India, we thought, oh God, this is a headache again, like change over this, apply for that visa, this category, that again. And the paperwork was a headache for them, but they did it and it was simply done, right? And nobody can touch them. So that is the point of bringing in even if they're economic migrants, that's fine. But you do it legally and nobody can touch you. No policy change can ever touch you. The ones who are shouting the loudest are actually the ones who are there the most illegal, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the point. That's the problem. So yeah, and nobody should feel bad. At least that is my understanding and my opinion on the matter, that nobody should feel bad for them, because like dishonesty never pays, and dishonesty should never pay, and dishonesty should never be rewarded. Yeah, you may be a political asylum seeker, then come through the proper channel for that, right? Don't try and get that don't have that instant coffee attitude that I will just arrive and I shall be given all the riches of the land. That is never going to work. You have to work for it, just like everybody else in that society works for it.
And we see the damages when you do have that sort of attitude, because just a couple weeks ago, there was the migrant caravan making its way through South America and Mexico up to the U.S. border. And once they finally, I think it was maybe 2 episodes ago on my podcast when I was covering that, and I found a video where all these people are at the border, and there's like whatever, like a little bit of a border wall there already. So they're like sitting on it, and they're like shouting, wanting in and stuff. And some of them, like one thing that drove me insane was at one point you just see all these migrants on the opposite end, still in Mexico, but they're just sitting there playing their music, dancing, celebrating. And I said, like, what the hell are you celebrating? You made your way up from your countries, and then you come on the border, and then you're just expecting them to let you in just because you are there. But there's absolutely no reason to do that. There's no reason for them to just let you in just because you show up on the border. And like, but these people just had this idea that because they're there, they should be allowed into America. Like borders didn't matter to them. It's like, well, who cares? Let us in. You have a rich society. You need to let us in now because we're just poor little whatever, wherever they're happen to come from. Like, so let us in. But there's plenty of reasons we shouldn't, because number of times too, there's been criminals that are allowed. In fact, I've heard that certain gangs, such as the MS-13 gangs, are using these sort of caravans, using these large migrants, these large migrant groups, in order to get in. And when they get in, they're either joining their gangs, or sometimes they're bringing drugs with them, and they're using it to smuggle drugs into the country. In fact, in 2015, when the migrant crisis was happening in Europe, they were also reporting how ISIS fighters were dressing as women in the burqas, and then we're using that in order to get into the country. And once they're in the country, well, we've heard of enough attacks that happened in Europe over the last 3 years, enough devastating attacks such as the Paris attacks or the Nice attacks, which I think killed something like 80 people or something like that. And this is the dangers go on when you're just going to let people in with no merit behind it. If you're just going to let them in and they don't have anything to bring with them, or they have no reason to be in, or they're not going to go through the official channels, this is the danger that comes with it.
See, the thing about having it, like India has a very big immigration problem. There are uncontrolled batches of immigrants that just enter the country from the porous borders on the east and the west. Like there are people coming in from Pakistan, there are people coming in from Nepal, there are people coming in from Bhutan, there are people coming in from Burma, there are people, Myanmar, there are people coming in from Bangladesh, most of all, right? These guys and the Islamic immigrants are they are causing the most amount of problems in the country. Like they get radicalized easily, they are more prone to being ghettoized, they are more prone to remain illiterate and unprotective members of society. And what do the left governments do? They hand them ration cards, they hand them free of cost, had national identity cards, they had them they get them registered illegally into social benefit schemes and social food schemes and all these things illegally, which are meant for citizens to uplift the poor citizens of India, and these guys, they just they waltz in and they take all these benefits. Why? Why? Because their votes are valuable to these guys, to the left parties. So yeah, so it's a problem. Like for example, the Rohingya crisis that was going on in Myanmar, India was flooded with about 40,000 Rohingyas just ran away into India. And they were kept in certain camps, they were set in certain ghettos. And what happened in those ghettos? They got radicalized. They joined different radical groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed, like Lashkar-e-Toiba, like Al-Qaeda. Some of them joined ISIS. Means the Jamaat-e-Islami, Bangladesh, they started becoming more active on the borders. Because why? These Rohingyas were joining these terror groups. So, yeah, migration, especially Islamic migration, there are great scrutiny must be placed on that, because right now we are building a wall on our borders. On the Bangladesh and Burma, on the Myanmar border, we are building a 4,100 kilometer wall. It's a high grade military grade. It's a military grade fence. It's a military grade wall actually. It's not really a fence. So with and also, yeah, these guys they encourage smuggling. They bring in all sorts of the medical issues they bring with them, like diseases, like which turn into epidemics, like there are all sorts of problems that these guys bring with them. Not to mention the terrorism problem, as I just mentioned. That is the most of them. So when we decided to throw out the Rohingyas from India, the who jumped up most of all, the left parties. Why? Because it affects their vote bank. And what did they do? They got certain. They even tried to get certain liberal members of the judiciary to try and block the government's effort to expel these people from the country. But so far, they have been unsuccessful. Thank God. Thank God.
Well, also the other thing is too is they're not just joining slums, but they do create new slums, because I've been seeing some pictures out of France right now, and things like parks and other public spaces are completely taken up by people living in tents. And this is also something that was happening on our border as well in Canada, was that when these migrants are coming in, they didn't have areas to put them, so they started setting up tents right along the border, and then you had thousands of tents just sitting there with people living in them. On top of that, they ended up sending a couple thousand over to Montreal, because there's the old, I think it's like the 1982 or 86 Olympic stadium that's been a crumbling mess for decades. But they ended up housing them in there for that reasons. And it's just they've created more slums. The slums they never do well. Slums never do well. And yeah, it just sort of breeds this sort of crime. It breeds the terrorist activity for sure. And I've been noticing one thing that I've started paying attention to now is where they're starting to put immigrants when they come in. I've started paying attention, like which areas, and it's always strategic, because they will put them in the cities because the cities have the most votes for the riding. You know, like for instance, Toronto is it's a key area for any election. If it's Ontario or a federal election, you pretty much need to win the Greater Toronto area in order to guarantee yourself a win in the coming election. And because of that, the ridings that are still purple right now, that are mixed between conservative and liberal, that's where they end up putting them, because they know that if they bring them in, they give them the benefits, they're going to vote for them, and they use it to swing the vote. It's just, they prove time and time again that they don't care at all about these people. They only care about the votes. They only care about securing their next election for themselves.
And especially in a geographically large country like Canada, where they can just go and hide. They can, if they are if you try and catch them, they can just go to any remote part of the country and hide. Also, if the demographics start changing quite easily, because Canada's population especially is quite low at 36 million, it's quite low. So demographics can be very easily changed. And when you take a stand and you try to boot these guys out of the country for logical reasons, these guys or take even logical steps to safeguard yourself from any strategic demographic change or anything. Guess who shouts the most? CNN, BBC, the UN. They start calling you names. Sons of bitches, I don't give a shit. I need to protect my country.
And I think this is actually what's going to end up happening out of this, is that people are going to stop caring what you call them. For instance, like they throw around words such as racist so easily, or sexist, that people are just not going to care anymore if you call them that, and they say, call me whatever you want, but I'm going to do what's best for my people. I'm going to do what's best for my country. I'm going to do what's best for my family. So I think that even though this is a tactic that's worked for them before, I think it's actually becoming a failed strategy, especially as people are starting to see through this idea that, you know, just calling someone racist means they're racist. You know, you got to give a lot more evidence for it than that. Like if they were coming in and like walking through to like say through a black community calling them N-bombs or something, well, then there's a very blatant example of them being racist. But just to make a blanket statement that the entire culture is racist, and the only way you're going to end this racism is by bringing in more people, is absolutely ridiculous. If anything, it's going to get people to double down. If people aren't on your side and your whole goal is just to keep doing what you're doing, well, then people are just going to be more resistant. In fact, because of this, we're seeing more groups that are rising because of this. In Canada, there were some, far right-wing parties already that were around, but we're starting to hear about them more and more. And I'll be honest, I don't even know if they're necessarily far right or if that's just being slandered by the media. And I'll go out on a limb and say it's probably they're being slandered by the media. But right now, but yeah, these groups have suddenly flourished because they've suddenly flourished because they just don't care anymore, and they see the dangers of it. And I actually think that they're starting to make ground with the common people. Is that even people that always saw themselves as open, tolerant, and diverse are starting to say now it's too much. We need to slow it down. Not a little while ago, there was a report saying that when you told Canadians the true number of immigrants that are coming into the country, their support for immigration suddenly dropped significantly, because they said most Canadians believe that there were about 150,000 people being brought in a year, which is a large enough number as it is. But the real number is closer to 260,000 per year. And both Trudeau and the UN have said, at least in concerning Canada, they want to see those numbers get bigger. But most of the citizens say that when they've heard these numbers, they're just like, whoa, that's way too much. We need to slow down. We can't have this many people coming in. So it really, for me, it destroys the idea that these people are just racist,
I have an interesting story about that, right? The year which Angela Merkel opened up the borders was, I think, 2014, or was it 2015? I don't remember.
It was probably the end of 2014, beginning of 2015.
Okay, beginning of 2015. In 2015, I remember this very clearly because I remember my reaction, right? In India, we were just sitting and just laughing our asses off at Germany, at how stupid they were to open up their borders to Muslims from some of the worst parts of the earth, right? So, and war-torn and all this. So, the quality of people coming in would be... And at that point, it was revealed that she had lost track of more than 500,000 immigrants, that she did not know where they were.
Holy crap.
Right? This was in 2015, right? And now that we know that she has nearly 1 million immigrants, she doesn't know where they are. And unofficial records say maybe 2 million, a little more than 2 million immigrants have come into Germany.
Jesus.
At that time, we were saying, how foolish is this woman? My God. And then one day, suddenly, after he got elected, immediately after Trudeau got elected, it was on our news channel. Trudeau said that he got elected in October. Around beginning of November, he made an announcement that by the end of 2015 and the beginning of 2016, we want to take in about 250,000 new immigrants. And our jaws were... Fast forward a few months, he made another press conference and another announcement, genius announcement he makes. I'm sorry, I don't mean to offense by that, but we felt like that this guy's a real genius. He says, I'm feeling really bad that I have not been able to meet the target of the immigrants that I wanted to come into the country. And we were looking at pictures of this guy going to the airport, welcoming immigrants and all this. What is he doing? Is he mad? You're inviting ISIS into your house.
Literally.
Indians have no love lost, Hindus especially have no love lost for the Muslims. Because for 900 years, we have suffered many hundreds of genocides and slavery under the Muslims, repeated invasions, looting. We know what Muslims are. We are the only people on earth who have the maximum amount of experience with knowing what Muslims are. And even today, Muslims in India say that they are not sorry for those days. They would go, and in a heartbeat, they would go and rule us again. They still don't apologize for it. Where the Western world has apologized to its colonies, saying that we are sorry, we didn't know any better. Still acceptable. We can move on from there. It's an apology. It's a heartfelt apology. We can move on from there. Okay, the past is the past. But what do you do with people who don't want to apologize, and on top of that they say, we will we will finish ourselves, we will finish our descendants, we will eat grass, but we will keep fighting to the death, we will keep fighting you, and we will not change our point of view. What do you do with such people? You can't do anything.
Yeah, what can you do with something like that? And
So,
yeah, that's
and you are inviting hundreds of thousands of them, and in the case of Merkel, millions of them into your homes. And then not only that, there was another genius move that Merkel made, was that she started holding classes for these these guys, for these Syrians and North Africans and all these guys who came into the country as refugees. She's holding classes on what? How to meet and interact with Western women. How mind-bogglingly devastating consequences will that have? That you're teaching them how to get with Western women. That will completely destroy your society.
we're already seeing some of the dangers of something like that happening, because I know that I think it was within like a year of this crisis, the immigration crisis that ended up happening, we were starting to hear certain things. Like there was a social push now in Germany for women to start wearing longer dresses, more long sleeve shirts. That was not coming from the citizens there, that was obviously coming from one group. It was coming from the Muslims, and it's very clear because of the way that they dress their women. I mean, like, since then, I mean, I am so sick and tired of signing on to Twitter and seeing another woman from one of these countries with bruises, beat the fuck up, and just like screaming about like what they've been through because of these groups of people. I remember a few months ago, like it literally tore at my heartstrings. It was this woman from France, and it was like it went viral for a little bit, although none of the media really picked it up. But it was like it was maybe a 2-minute video. She had a huge goose egg on her head. She had a black eye, cuts all over her face, and you know what she did? She refused sex to a Muslim guy, so he beat the shit out of her because she refused sex to him. And because of this, we're starting to see these all sorts of movements. Like there's a movement in Germany right now called it's hashtag 120dB, which stands for 120 decibels. And these are German women that are tired of being victimized, and they're starting to organize themselves into a defense group where they're teaching each other self-defense, and they're trying to make social pushes to like policy pushes with their government. And it was called 120 dB, stands for 120 decibels, because in Germany they have very restricted on the weapons that they can carry, So what they have is it's a pocket alarm that goes 120 decibels loud that they can press if they're ever under attack. But this is the point that these women have gotten to, that the fact that they actually have to form a movement to protect themselves because they're not being protected by their government. And in the commercial that they put out, that's exactly what they said. They said the government is not protecting us. We need to protect ourselves. And in terms of what you're talking about, inviting in ISIS terrorists, well, Canada is literally inviting in ISIS terrorists. They are like, we're the only country so far of the Western countries that is not revoking citizenship and has not, the other countries are at least hunting down their terrorists that like their citizens that left to go fight on there. They're hunting them down, but Canada's not doing that. In fact, just the other day, we had one of our ministers, Ralph Goodale, who ended up saying that, well, they're Canadian, we can't take them back. They have pretty much a right to return to their homes, which is complete horseshit. Because first of all, it's against the criminal code of Canada, that you can't go and fight for a foreign power. Otherwise, you are breaking the law. So there's no reason for this to happen. And one of the most disgusting things I saw recently was that there was a ISIS terrorist who, well, back in September of 2017, he gave an interview with CBC News. First of all, what I thought was disgusting about it is CBC actually felt they had to protect his identity. They did the whole interview from behind like a screen or like some panel, so you couldn't see who it was. They used like his ISIS name, so you couldn't actually tell what his real name was. And recently, it just came out that he gave an interview to, I think it was the New York Times, where he admitted to killing people by shooting them in the back of the head. And then this went out and people got outraged. And then and then he comes back out and says, oh, no, I just made that up. I never really actually killed anybody, which is complete horseshit. But the government's not doing anything about that. And you know your situation is so bad when someone like Jihadi Jack from the UK, who has been not only a fighter for ISIS, but has been one of their biggest recruiters for ISIS in online. He full out said a couple months ago, he says, I don't want to go back to the UK. I want to go to Canada. So what did the government do? What did our government do? They started putting it in the works so he could come to Canada. Now, I don't know what the status is of that today. I don't know whether that's still in the works or whatever, but they were actually trying to work it out so Jihadi Jack can come to Canada. I mean, is there really a better example? Well, they may not actually fall along the lines of legally what is treason. Is there anything more treacherous from your government than welcoming in your enemies to live with your citizens and put them in danger?
Yeah, but more treasonous would be like what Merkel did, would teaching them how to get on with your women. That's more treasonous.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's actually a good point.
But on the other hand, I did not expect this from you. This is slander against the world's only feminist religion, and I would not tolerate such slander from you. You check yourself or go to jail. But seriously,
I'm just a racist, white, cisgendered bastard.
Yes, that's exactly what you are, and you should apologize. But seriously, the fact that you mentioned UK, that's very interesting. UK has a very big problem with its Islamic community. Let's come at this from another angle. You know what that problem is? Birth defects. And Medicare is required because of birth defects. You know where this birth defect comes from?
Incest.
Because first cousins are getting consanguineous marriages, as they are called. First cousins get married. Like if you have a brother, you have your brother has a son and you have a daughter, and they get married. That's the marriage. That's what's happening, especially in the British Pakistani community, right, and the Arab communities. So, and what happens when nearly 40% of the children are born with birth defects. And now, what happens when this is going on? What does it put a strain on? Taxpayer-funded medical programs, taxpayer-funded hospitals. That's where the stress falls on. So you are essentially paying for their cultural eccentricities. Let's put it that way. Right. So that's basically medical terrorism, if I were to coin a term for it. So they're carrying the cultural baggage from their countries and they're messing it up for everybody. Right. They're just it's like shit hitting the fan and shit flying everywhere. That's what is happening.
Okay. On top of that, I was just going to say, on top of that too, they also have a big problem with stillborn deaths. They have the highest rate of stillborn deaths in the entire world, I believe.
Amen, amen, amen. Yes, they do.
And here we go, right here. We have it right. This article right here: 70% of Pakistan, half of Arab world plagued by shocking inbreeding afflictions. So it's not like we're bullshitting when we talk about that. We're being very literal, very realistic when we're talking about these sort of things.
Yeah, and we are the ones who get blamed for being Nazis, right? We are the Nazis. We are the ones who are not normal for accepting inbreeding. We should accept inbreeding. Why should we accept inbreeding? Bullshit. We should accept inbreeding. And the medical fallout of that. Why should we take care of your problems? You take care of your problems. Empower yourselves to solve and be responsible. That's how the trust is built. Now, if you behave like children, you'll be treated like children. And if you behave like delinquents, then you'll be booted out. You'll be expelled. Like delinquents are often expelled from their schools. They should be expelled. What more to say on that, right? And UK also has another problem of government-funded madrasas, Islamic schools, which are hotbeds for terrorist recruiting, especially in our country. Like in the northern state of Uttar Pradesh, when the BJP government took over, they first of all they banned government funding of madrasas. Madrasas were up in arms over this. Like, how can you stop government funding? Then the government just said, make good with what you get, or there will be consequences. And immediately they shut up. And when they started making noise a little while later after that, what the government said was they didn't do anything. What they said was, you will prove your patriotism to this country by uploading onto the web of all the Independence Day and Republic Day functions that you hold, and we want to see a video proof of you people raising the hoisting the tricolor of India, because we don't feel you are patriotic enough. And almost thousands of madrasas, most of them Salafi and Wahhabi madrasas, being funded by the Middle East and spreading that hardcore extremist ideologies, and which is being taught to children in these madrasas, suddenly had to hold tricolor hoisting programs, and they had to hold Republic Day and Independence Day programs. Yeah, and they had to teach the kids about all the famous freedom fighters and all that who have fought for the country. They did like it, but they had to do it because the government said, or you get the boot.
One video that I ended up seeing, I don't know how long it's been now, but it was just this imam speaking in a mosque, and he was like, he had like a huge huge amount of people there, huge crowd, and like the whole thing was filled up. And anyway, so he kept saying things that would be considered radical ideas, you know, like things against the Jews, things against like how men should treat their women, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, how many of you think this? And like almost every single one, actually, I think it is every single one, would raise their hands, you know, blah, 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 blah. And then he would ask them like, are you extremists, you know? And they'd be like, no, no, no. And he's like, you see, but like the Western people don't get this. He was pretty much laughing in the faces of Western countries and what they say, because, you know, they say like, oh, no, 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 this is only a small sect of Islam. Like, this is like the radical Islam, but you don't have to worry about the average Muslim. But these people were pretty much saying, we are the average Muslim, and this is what we believe. And so that was another one of those things. That was another one of those red pill moments for me, where I was like, holy shit. For me, the first time I ever got red pilled on Islam was when I started seeing the statistics that came out of, I think it was a Pew poll, if I remember correctly. It was Pew polls where they were just saying sort of ideas that that Muslims hold in different areas of the world. And it would be things like how many want Sharia law to be the law of the land, how many believe that like stoning is acceptable for leaving the religion. And sure, if you were looking at sort of the more like Western European countries for the Muslims, like it was much lower, but it was still like higher than you'd like to see. These would still be like 25%, 30% of the Muslims would believe that. But when you went to the Middle East, holy shit, man, that's where all of them had the radical ideas. Like even something like Egypt, which is supposed to be one of those like countries that is like in the Muslim world that's supposed to be like well-formed and, you know, civilized. Even they were saying like 90% of them believe that death is an acceptable course for leaving the religion. So that was my very first red pill moment on Islam. And then that video I saw was another one that I ended up seeing.
No, see, Egypt, let me just tell you something about Egypt. Egypt is a Salafi country. Salafism is the ideology of ISIS. Let's just put it that way. Mm-hmm. Okay, and Egypt is a majority Salafi country. So let's not have any wrong ideas about Egypt. And as far as Islam goes, any strain of Islam, go to any part of the world, go to any mosque in Canada, their Friday prayers start with death to the non-believer. That's the opening line. May God give us strength to bring death to the non-believer. In some version or the other, this is the first line that they start with.
Well, that's pretty damn telling of the religion if that's the opening line to the prayers.
And and this is every mosque. This is not, there's some mosques, this is every mosque, without fail, without exception. So, I would invite you to go to your nearest mosque and just see, dude, you have the beard, you have the, like, you can pretend to be a Muslim. Just wear the cap, just go to a mosque and just record what the prayer is. And then if it's not in English, then get it translated by somebody who knows the language. And for sure, you will see death to the non-believer is the opening line to the prayer, to the preamble. It's like the preamble to the prayer. Yeah.
This is why.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is why Islam is a more of an Arabic supremacy religion, because they already believe that that anybody who's not Arab and a Muslim, they're at least considered a second-class citizen to them. And I remember this was actually full out told to me by one of my coworkers one time several years ago. That he said that saying like prayers in non-Arabic language, like if you were to try and say prayers in English or something like that, he said that that is actually considered like a sin, or it's like you don't do that sort of thing. Like it's terrible.
Yeah, that's definitely worth a dab. Like I should dab on air like this. Like that's definitely worth a dab because because truer words. I don't think have ever been spoken, because that is definitely true. Like because Maulvis don't allow it because the control then goes out of their hands. There is probably only one version of the Quran where it is in chronological order.
Yeah, other than that,
only
it's all over the place.
Yeah, there is only one, and that is considered to be a haram version of the Quran, the chronological version of the Quran. So yeah, they have a problem, and it is not getting better, and they don't apologize because their ideology is we will eat grass, but we will keep fighting.
Absolutely.
That is a rough translation of what we hear in our country.
And that's actually one reason that in the past is why I am more of a supporter of Israel these days, is because I know that the Jews living in Israel, like there's things to criticize of Israel, absolutely. But the one thing about it is, if between the two areas of Palestine and Israel, if one side, let's say the Palestinians, Hamas, Hezbollah, and all them, they lay down their arms tomorrow, what would end up happening? Well, probably more or less nothing. There may be some takeover by Israel, but all in all, things would probably be still par for the course. Life would go on as it is. But if Israel was to lay down their arms tomorrow, well, then we'd see Israel completely wiped off the map in 24 hours. They would literally take part in what they've said before of they said we will drive the Jews into the sea. That is almost literally, probably literally what would happen. If this like, I was so shocked the first time. Like, I didn't, like, that was one thing about Islam I didn't know either, was their sentiments on the Jews. But, you start reading through the Quran and you start seeing what it says about them. And there's the one passage, which I know I'm paraphrasing. It's not actually, I don't remember the exact passage, but it pretty much says, something along the lines of, like, we will achieve the work of Allah when every rock and every tree shouts out, "Hey, Muslim, come quick. There's a Jew behind me. Come kill him."
Wow. See, what can we say about the Jews or Israel? There is no greater scholar amongst us than Bold Like a Leopard, who is in the chat, I believe. Like, Bold, if you want to jump in, the link's in the Discord, buddy. This is your chance. So,
he did say that he may join in a few, so he may be joining us.
Oh, awesome. So, we can have a great discussion regarding that with Bold. So, they have a problem. See, as far as India is concerned, every time the Israeli army goes across the river and kicks the asses of the Arabs, the biggest cheers you will hear are from India. I'm not even joking. Right? We sit in front of our TV screens. We see Israeli missiles going into the Arab territories. There are literally champagne corks popping here. So yeah, so you will never hear an Indian person criticizing Israel. If you do, kick his ass.
Well, the thing is too, is one narrative I am tired of hearing is that a lot of people say that these Palestinian rockets that get fired into Israel, they say they're pretty much fireworks, they're really nothing. It's like, no, these are actually missiles that could hurt people, kill people if they managed to land inside the city. And I find a lot of people don't really take that into account when they're talking about it. Or again, they say these are nothing. I mean, when I think back to the 2014 Gaza war, one thing I remember seeing just before it ended up happening in the newspaper was talking about Hamas fired thousands of rockets into Israel, thousands of them. And then a week later, Israel goes into Gaza and everybody is shitting on Israel for doing that. I'm like, well, what else would anyone else do if suddenly a foreign power started firing rockets in your country? Of course you'd go to war. And I mean, I know the casualty rate for the Palestinians was significantly higher than the Jews, But how many videos did we see come out of Hamas putting rockets in the middle of a residential area? He's literally using these people as human shields. And this is some of the problems that I've had too with what's even with everything that's gone on over the last like month or two, because there's been a lot of Palestinians that have been killed on the Israel border. I mean, I put out a tweet yesterday. I said, I hate seeing so many people killed and injured. And there was even like, there's things to criticize for sure. I mean, there was a Canadian who was injured in that in just the other day because he was a medical officer. He was helping people. He ended up getting shot in the leg. So he was pretty well signified, like he was wearing everything he needed to show he's a medical officer. So something like that, obviously, I would criticize because you're shooting medical staff. But the problem is that they're using these Palestinians as human shields. Their soldiers are there, but where are they? They're sitting in the back. They're putting the civilians forward. They're putting the women forward. And then they're also talking about how children got hurt. What the fuck are children doing in these areas, in these protests? Why would a parent take their kid into these areas to, why would they take them into these areas for a protest? Because, it's going to be violent. You know that people are probably going to die or get shot. So bringing your kid to something like that is the worst decision you can make. But that's what Hamas wants. In fact, a lot of times they pay people to go to the border wall in order to put up these, to start these protests and everything like that. I mean, even something like everyone's talking about how this March for Return is about the Palestinians taking back their home. And they said, well, we lost it in 1948. Well, what the hell happened in 1948? 5 nations tried to destroy Israel off the face of the earth, and Israel fought back and it ended up taking this land. And the thing is, too, is a lot of people say, well, it's against the Geneva Convention that you can secede territory through war nowadays. The problem is with that was the 4th Geneva Convention, which wasn't signed on until the 60s. So people are trying to take a document that was signed decades later and apply it to what happened in 1948. In 1948, taking territory by conquest was still considered an acceptable part of war.
Yeah. See, first, let me tell you a story about Hamas. Okay, Israel bombed Hamas so much. They bombed the literal shit out of Hamas. Like 37 kinds of shit out of Hamas was bombed out of them by Israel. Right? So much so that one day they just got up and declared, we are now going to leave terrorism and we are going to become a political party. Because terrorism is not effective against these guys. They got a terrorist organization to just back off and say, we will become a political party. Basically, they just bombed the masculinity out of these guys. It was that bad. So, and as far as the Geneva Convention goes, let me tell you the story of Kashmir. Okay, the problem with Pakistan. In short, the crux of the matter is, what happened was in 47 we got our independence. Yeah, August of 47. And in 48, Pakistani soldiers dressed as tribals entered Kashmir. At that point of time, India was 600 different princely states. We were still not unified as India. We were in the process of unification. Kashmir at that point of time, Jammu and Kashmir were not a part of India. They were still debating whether they didn't want to join us and they wanted to be independent. They didn't even want to join Pakistan. That's the history. And what happened was these Pakistani soldiers dressed as mujahids or tribals, they entered into Kashmir secretly and they started a war or tried to start a rebellion over there, trying to show that the people from the grassroots are rebelling against India. Right? That failed. The Indian army went in, just bombed the shit out of them. They were finished. It was over in 10-15 days. It's known as the 48 war. This war is not mentioned in the history of Pakistan anywhere. Today, if you go to Pakistan, you will not be able to find a mention. Hey, Bold, what's up? Bold.
You're muted, bud. We'll give him a minute.
Yeah, let's give him. So anyway, the Pakistan, you will not find a mention of this in Pakistan. So after the 48 war, what happened was they started talking. They went to the UN and saying that it is a legal part of we want Kashmir. Kashmir belongs to us, which UN rejected at that. What ended up happening was after that, when Pakistan saw UN was not responding, they sent their army in. The king of Kashmir was refusing to join India, but when he saw that the Pakistani army was 1 hour away from the capital of Srinagar, the capital city of Srinagar, what ended up happening was, hey, bold.
Hey, how's it going, guys? Yeah, I don't want to cut in the middle, so go ahead.
Yeah, we're talking about the Kashmir's problem, like in short, the history of what happened. So yeah, so after the 48 war, the UN rejected Pakistan's claim on Kashmir, and what ended up happening was they were an hour away from Srinagar when the king ran to India saying, please protect us. India said, that's your sovereign issue, that's not our issue. You want to be an independent country, you be an independent country. Okay, so the only way we will send military support is like if you join the Federation of India, like the Republic of India. And at that point, it is known that the king abused the home minister a bunch of times, Sardar Patel, who was unifying the country at that point of time. He abused him a bunch, like he abused his ancestors, abused a whole bunch of things, and then he signed the accession papers. Now, this is the document on the basis of which India says Jammu and Kashmir is the integral part of India. Pakistan went and said we should have a plebiscite to decide, because the king was a Hindu king in a Muslim majority area. He decided on his own without consulting the people, which is blatantly false. But okay, let's go with that. What happened after that was Pakistan now came to fight a war with us again. The 65 war, which they lost again very badly, and then the 71 war, very even worse. They were like something like 100,000 prisoners of war we had taken. And after that, what ended up happening was the Pakistanis went to the UN and said, we want a plebiscite. We want the Kashmiri people to decide. Now, the condition the UN set for the plebiscite was, first, Pakistan will demilitarize, then India will demilitarize that place, conditional that they would leave some troops for the safety and law and order for that place, and then the plebiscite will be held under strict guidelines and under UN supervision. After that, what happened was Pakistan backed off. They refused to demilitarize. So the first condition of the plebiscite solution was not met. Now this becomes the backdrop to the Kashmir problem, which involves terrorism, war, everything, which as it exists today. This is the backdrop. Then Pakistan got sent in bunch of Maulvis and then radicalized the local population. Bunch of things happened. Yeah, but the fact of the matter is Pakistan refused. In the exact same way Pakistan refused, Palestine has refused to listen to any of Israel's, refuse to accept any of Israel's points. Right? Israel, on many accounts, Bold will be able to tell us better about, tell us like in much greater detail about that issue. That Israel has made overtures to Palestine saying that, okay, we are willing to listen, we are willing to talk to you. Palestine has spit in the face of all efforts to hold bilateral talks to resolve this issue. So that's the extent of my knowledge. So Bold can enlighten us further on this.
Yeah. So what's the question, like concessions and all that?
We were talking more mainly about everything that went down in Israel over the last month, and then right now we're just talking more about relationships, about how the Palestinians have pretty much like not willing to meet with Israel, and they're not willing to meet any of their demands. Well, Palestine wants all their demands met, but they're not willing to meet any of Israel's demands.
So let me pull up. I did a blog on minds.com. Do you guys use minds.com?
I do.
Yeah.
So I did. I'll send you the link in the chat, I guess, or the holy crap. There's a lot of like really nice ladies on minds.com.
Oh, maybe you're not on minds.com. Maybe
So
you're on Pornhub.
there's a lot of Bonnie Lasses on here. Yeah,
You found your new girlfriend, Bold?
I don't think these women are real.
Oh, sick bird.
They might be CGI or something. So I wrote a whole article summarizing yesterday, and I'm going to do continuation. Probably going to work on the continuation either today or, there's something else I was going to work on that we both know about, Jimso and Arjun, a different project. So I might have a second part either today or by the end of the week of this article. But it's all about the fact that the Palestinian people, they're basically the hostages to a very stupid strategy on the part of their leadership. And I actually did a live stream yesterday. I don't think either of you guys got to watch it, and it was taken down because of copyright, because I played A Flock of Seagulls, I Ran So Far Away, if you know that song. So YouTube took it down, and I can't get it back. But in any case, so where do you want me to start? Last month or in general?
Well, why don't you start with everything that's gone on with the embassy?
Yeah.
So look, I'm personally somebody. I always say full disclosure when I'm talking about the topic. I was in the Israeli army for about 2.5 years. So I'm
monster.
Not, yeah. I'm basically I'm like one of the Decepticons basically. I'm one of the evil guys.
Yeah, most evil ever. You're like Sauron from Lord of the Rings.
Exactly. There's nothing worse than me. In any case, so the issue with the embassy is something of symbolics, and I personally never cared about the embassy. I've always believed that the best solution has nothing to do with embassies or symbolism. It's for people to disengage from, stop the foreign aid to the Palestinians and the Israelis, whether it's by the Americans or the UN, and you let them, if they so desire, you let them settle the conflict without outside pressures. But they've never taken that attitude, whether it's the US or the EU, sometimes Russia. Russia, I'd say, is the least to blame here. For everything else we blame Russia for, they're the least to blame. So I don't want anybody bringing up Vladimir Putin for the rest of the conversation, because
but Putin.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing is he sells guns. I mean, since when is that a problem? We sell guns.
He sold a lot of guns to Saudi Arabia.
Right.
He's just one of those MacGuffins or red herrings that people like they use in movie plot devices to just distract your attention.
Yeah, and I what I really hate about the Israeli-Palestine conflict is and I guess I'm getting repetitive now because I talk about it all the time with other stuff. Is people are focused on moral judgments all the time, but both of the Israelis and I guess of the Palestinians as well. And the embassy move was mandated by Congress back in the 90s. And other, U.S. officials, especially President Clinton, and then President Bush, second President Bush, and President Obama, all had they had the stated goal of moving the embassy. So the United States, because of lobbying efforts by AIPAC, which I don't support AIPAC, by the way, but they succeeded in lobbying Congress to pass these resolutions to move the embassy. So yes, Congress committed to it. 3 U.S. presidents prior to Donald Trump stated that they wanted to move it. The reason that now, okay, so you want to complain about lobbyists, that's fine. I'll give you that. I have a lot of criticism for AIPAC, a lot of criticism. I feel that they've done some damage by making Israel kind of too dependent on the graces of Congress and military aid. However, compare that to the U.S. State Department, which has blocked the move, which is something mandated by Congress due to their belief that it would inflame the passions of the Arab and Muslim world. So, yes, they do have an obligation. They're the diplomats. Their commitment should be to, bettering the foreign relations of the United States. But they're not elected officials. They don't get to choose everything as so far as our relations with the rest of the world. With that said, I think, I criticize, I don't know about you, Arjun, I criticize a lot of our relationship with China, us being the United States, a lot of our relationship with Latin America. How come the State Department, they get such a broad mandate to do that type of stuff? It's the same thing with the embassy. The Congress did mandate in the 90s, right or wrong, to move the embassy to Jerusalem. And Mr. Trump just, he fulfilled that mandate by Congress. Yes, Arjun, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, I just want to make a quick point about the fact that you said Israel being dependent on the good graces of U.S. Congress. Yeah, that Netanyahu understands that point. That's why he was so relieved and at the same time excited and enthusiastic at the fact of Modi's overtures to Israel and Modi's support to Israel. Because when Modi visited Israel, it sent the Middle East into chaos because they understand what it means to have the backing of a powerful democracy like India. And and also the fact that with growing relationships with Israel over the next few years, what we'll do is probably, to a great extent, reduce Israel's dependence on U.S. support, right? Regardless whether a Democrat comes in or a Republican comes in. Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely, and I think the problem is that here in the U.S., if you're on the right, a lot of people believe in this really faith-based foreign policy, I've criticized Islam. We all criticize Islam, and I think that there has to be a change there. On the left, there's the opposite. They're basically myopic regarding the Islamic issues. And to go to Arjun's example, I think every country, the best thing to do is that no country ideally should be dependent on another country. So India, if India was to try to craft a foreign policy, the United States shouldn't have objections that India and China would have some commercial relationship. They should compete for the business of India and the business of China. The same thing if India and Canada have a great relationship, or Canada and Russia. It's in the interest of these countries not to get to first of all promote trade between each other, and to not get into wars with each other. But sorry if I kind of digressed a bit. The embassy move. Let's be clear about where the placement of the embassy is. And I should have put this in the article, but let me pull up a map here. So if you look at the placement of the embassy within let me see here, the city of Jerusalem, you can see, here we go. I'm just going to share the screen in a second. It's actually in literally neutral territory if you go by the pre-1967 borders. So this territory is where, can you see my cursor?
Yeah. No. Could you show me again once again?
How about now?
Dude, once again. Yeah.
So
yeah, show. Where's the cursor?
Over here.
Oh yeah, I see it.
So this
under Talpiot.
So this area before 1967 was legally UN territory. It was where there was a massive UN compound, and so therefore, basically the U.S. was ceded lands by the Israeli government that if we were to return to 1967 borders, Well, who the fuck knows who would get that land anyway? It was belonged to the UN before 1967, so there is no grounds to complain. It's basically like if they squatted on land that was unclaimed.
And dude, 1 second, I just sorry to cut in.
Yeah, go ahead.
How far is it? How far is it away from the Muslims are in East Jerusalem, right?
Yeah, it's technically
How far is it away?
it's technically between both of them, but yeah, I believe it's over. Yeah, it's over here. It's this area.
Okay, so how are they being allowed? How are those stone pelters being allowed to come all the way to the U.S. Embassy site and then like protest like that and pelt stones and all that and create general ruckus without them sort of being like at least being charged by the police? So
were there actually? Are you saying in Jerusalem there were people stoning the embassy or whatever?
Were there? Because there was a whole bunch of stone pelting activity going on in that area, right?
I'd have to check. I know in Bethlehem there was, and Bethlehem's a ways away from there, but it's sort of in the same area.
But there were protesters in Jerusalem, right?
Yeah, there were protesters, but there were protests throughout Israel, and what people don't take into account is where was the carnage? I mean, both of us are, and you know, or the three of us all know that the focus of the carnage was in the Gaza Strip. It wasn't the West Bank. There were probably a few wounded, but and I served in the West Bank. I didn't serve in Gaza. It's not like I'm the leading authority on this, but the fact is that the casualties happen in Gaza because the government of Gaza is focused on attaining a certain. They're willing to pay a price in blood to get their cause publicized, and that's why they were telling people. And you know, I was arguing with some people that were on the show, including you know, one of the delegates, the Bernie delegates, who said, you know, how can you justify this? You know, there was an 8-month-old infant that died from tear gas inhalation. He said, read the article. I read the article, and you know, I highlighted some paragraphs, and I said, well, look, the fact of the matter is that the baby originally wasn't in the protest. The mother had left the baby at home, and then the uncle heard the baby crying and took the baby to one of the tents at the protest. And you know, they're burning tires there, and they're dropping tear gas. The Israelis are dropping tear gas. So there is no justification for that. He had poor parenting and bad and the society is what's that?
No, what I'm saying is like, see, if you are going to fight a war, then you have to accept the casualties, like no matter what they are, no matter how tragic it is. Like fight a war, have some fortitude, right? You have to have a stomach for war. If there is a war going on, no matter which side, who started it, you have to have a stomach for it. So just to like nitpick about these like things and say, oh, these are human rights tragedies, that's like nobody is going to buy that bullshit.
So yeah, the thing is, I did see there's one person. There are people who criticize Israel, and I think they do a very good case and analysis of it. And the one who always comes to mind is Styx Hexenhammer. I think do both of you watch him, or just I know Jim's...
I've seen a little bit of it. I just recently saw a little bit of it.
So he's a person. He does come from a more libertarian standpoint, and he says, well, I can criticize the loss of civilian human life against Israel by Israel, and still not agree that Israel doesn't have the right to exist. And you know, he says, oh, the white nationalists and the pro Arabs will like criticize him and say, oh, you're a cuck and you're giving into the Zionists. He's like, no, I mean, there's nothing. What does that have to do with, you know, I can criticize somebody and still acknowledge their right to exist. And I wish that there were more people who could give more of a sober analysis. I think his analysis was a little flawed, you know, but it's a respectable one. And that's something that's lacking now, because there's so many people who, and I'll tell you one thing. I don't. Does this interest you? Like, I'll just give one small criticism of his, unless you guys want to move on.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So he cited this article in Haaretz, which is the left-wing Israeli paper yesterday, and he said it's kind of a contradiction that Haaretz is calling its own government alt-right, while it's you know, while at the same time it's also complaining about the United States being alt-right and everything. So what he did not know was that the person who wrote the article, you can't see, it's really small, but her name is Diana Buttu, and Diana Buttu happens to be a former negotiator and legal advisor for the Palestine Liberation Organization. So,
Of course she is.
What's that? Can you see that?
Of course she is.
Yeah. So Haaretz, so Sticks, you know, this is something that you have to really pay attention to a lot of things going on to know that, because she's not a household name. But the fact is that Haaretz, yes, it's a paper that's based in Israel, but it's a paper that they featured the work of somebody who's not an Israeli. She's a Canadian who had Palestinian parents, who worked for the Palestinian side in the negotiations. So no, it's not. This isn't even the Israeli left saying this, even though I think it would be fair to assume that they agree with a lot of it. But there are a lot of people who they will read something in Haaretz and they'd say, well, this is actually the beliefs of a lot of people in the Israeli street that aren't willing to speak out. It's just not true. Haaretz is basically the equivalent of, I would say, you know, here in the U.S., we have, I guess, let me think, the Atlantic. You guys know the Atlantic Monthly?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't. I've not heard of it.
So
like,
it's like
how left is it? Like, is it like New York? Is it like the failing New York Times?
I'd say it's more left than the New York Times.
Oh, it's more left. Huh?
Yeah.
So they're really the cream of the crop. Huh?
Yeah, and you know, that's why sometimes I do, you know, I'll watch a Sticks video and I'll say, yes, he's being unfair, but I can understand how the misinformation gets there, because not everybody focuses on the issue enough to know who this person is. And you can read from the article itself. It says Israel's celebrations continue this week, this time celebrating nearly 51 years of military occupation and the denial of freedom. So that's how she starts off. As the reward for maintaining a more than half century of occupation, the U.S. will also be moving its embassy to Jerusalem, a decision that only serves to embolden Israel's illegal actions. It is easy for Israel to celebrate. It's gotten what it wants: land, international recognition, and a quisling Palestinian leadership that maintains security for Israel, and barely a whisper of condemnation from world powers. Now, it's a bit ironic of her to say that when she used to work for the Palestinian Authority. And I mean, you know, I guess maybe she became jaded and disillusioned by it. But this is an interview for NPR back in 2002, when I guess she was working. Maybe it's because she loved Arafat and hates the new Palestinian leader. But the fact is, there's one thing where she can't dispute that Abbas has been more hard line on negotiations. Arafat did go to negotiations. Abbas never has. So, you know, she's very inconsistent in that respect. Abbas has publicly said he would go to negotiations, but he's always lied about it and never done it. So,
see, that's the thing about these guys. You should, Bold, you should actually keep a very close eye on India-Middle East relations. I'll tell you why. Because if the Middle East pisses off Modi even this much, you know which embassy is moving to Jerusalem next.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Because the Middle East right now is shit scared to move the Indian embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv, because they have been bending over backwards to give Modi concession after concession, billions of dollars in deals, no questions asked, just because they want him to they wanted him to sign to vote against the moving of the embassy of US to Jerusalem, which Modi did. But Modi told Israel in advance that he would be voting against them, and it did not affect India-Israel ties one bit. Yeah, because the whole world criticized India for it, but it didn't affect India-Israel relations. The second point about that is India is fed up with the Middle East right now because of their various activities and funding of terror within India. and this message has gone out to the Middle East, because in the last the Islamic Cooperation Council, something Gulf Cooperation Council, whatever meeting, which has been for the past many years, year after year, annually being slamming India for occupying Kashmir illegally, so-called. Last year, what happened was they didn't talk about Kashmir at all. 57 or 58 Muslim countries didn't talk about the Kashmir issue and left Pakistan out in the cold. You know why? Because Modi told them.
I would say,
So
yeah.
So you should keep an eye out on that, because you know which embassy is very soon probably likely to move to Jerusalem, and that will be a big blow.
I'd say, like, first of all, yeah, that's a great point. If they'd be pissed off about America moving the embassy, if India did it, or not just India, there's other countries moving already from Latin America, and the left wing doesn't care, because they'll call them basically, they'll say, oh, Paraguay, who gives a shit about Paraguay, and they'll call it some sort of imperialist pawn of the U.S. or something. Well, I don't know if you can say necessarily the same thing about India.
You can't at all. That's the point. That's the point. You can't call India pawn of the US, because India has always maintained like a non-alignment. So everybody knows that if India moves, that's purely because India is doing it. And the other point is, India has good relations with a lot of countries and can convince them to move their embassies as well. So India is a big player amongst at least the Asian powers. So that is why the Middle East doesn't want, and it's a bigger democracy than the US, so it has a louder voice in that sense. Yeah.
And I'd also say, I'd like to hear from either of you guys. I mean, how important really? I personally, this is me, this is Ramon. I'm not speaking for the Jewish community. I'm not speaking for the Israelis. I don't know how important it is for an embassy to be either in Jerusalem or in Saskatoon or whatever. But if Canada were moved to the embassy to Jerusalem, or if India were to move to the embassy to Jerusalem, I don't see why anybody gives a shit. It's an embassy, and that's it. It's a symbolic place where you have diplomatic meetings and certain clerical issues for the country in the foreign state. If they hadn't moved the embassy, if Trump hadn't moved the embassy, I guess it would have been technically a broken promise of his, but I personally wouldn't have been too bent out of shape. What do you guys think? Is it that important of an issue in your opinion, aside from all the riots that have happened in relation to it?
Well, first off, I'd just like to welcome 40 Ounce onto the channel. How you doing, bud?
Doing good. How you guys doing?
Not too bad. We're just in the middle of talking about everything with the embassy in Israel right now and all the violence that took place out of that. Yeah. Why don't we start off with your take on it?
Well, I think one of the problems was that the U.S. should have done it a lot sooner, I think. Just kind of rip the Band-Aid off, so to speak, and just get the pain over with. Otherwise, we wouldn't really be having these riots today if that was the case. If initially the embassy was just moved to Jerusalem, it's declared the capital of Israel. It's already the capital of Israel. But if the U.S. were to acknowledge the fact that this is the capital of Israel, I don't think we'd be having too many more problems like we're having in this particular instance. There would have been the mass rioting and everything like that. But yes, I believe it was promised under the Reagan administration. And one of the problems is that there was no set time limit as to when the embassy should be moved. And so that's why it's literally been decades later. And it literally it came to a point where it's just like, right, well, let's just do it. That's essentially what Trump said. But everyone's just been putting it off. So I'm glad that it's finally over and done with. This is something that presidents have been promising for quite a while, a kind of empty promise to Israel. So I'm glad it's finally over with, to be honest.
And going back to what you were saying, Bull, you said, like, does it really matter if the embassy is in where it is in, whether it's Tel Aviv or whether it's Jerusalem? I think maybe with everything that's going on in Israel, it's not necessarily the super important like in the past, because just like there's always been that contention between Jerusalem. I do support the fact that Trump finally moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, but like I don't necessarily think that having rights over a city based on biblical reasons is necessarily valid. However, considering how Jerusalem is more or less like in Israel right now, and I would say Israel has more claim over Jerusalem, I am in support of that. Although in normal circumstances, I do think it actually is important to have the embassy inside the capital for a couple different reasons. One, it's more of a symbolic reason. You know, it's if you have the embassy inside the capital, it shows more of a union between the two countries. Also, the other reason would be, I just had it and then I just lost it. It would be for, oh crap, my memory. I hate my memory sometimes. So you have the union between the two countries, and that's why it's in there. Crap, I can't remember what I was going to say on my second point.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the thing about that is, it's the key in this case. Yeah, superficially, if you look at it, it doesn't matter, right? You can have it in you can have it in Haifa, you can have it in any other city for that matter. Yeah, but the fact is, the Jewish people have had Jerusalem as their capital for thousands of years. B, it is in their scriptures that it's written that Jerusalem is the holy capital of the Jews. And C, the context matters in this case, that moving the embassy to Jerusalem is a big FU to all the Islamic countries, right? It is like a power move to say that we don't give a shit about what you think. You have been whining like little bitch ass N-words for so many years, and we don't give a shit about you anymore. That's the thing. That is the point, and that is what is like really bothering the left of any Western country, or any country for that matter, and in the UN and these well, as I said, these bitch ass Arabs.
Well,
that's some of the funniest trash talk I've ever heard.
Well, the second point that I was going to make, I just remembered it now, had to do with government interaction. You know, when you have an embassy from another country inside the capital, you're going to have, it's a lot easier for the two nations in order to interact with each other. So I think that's another important reason why you should have for the most part, you should have embassies inside the capital.
Yeah, that's a security issue. Yeah, that's true.
Although right now, I know the one thing is the UN has been pretty vocal right now about this whole situation. I actually just pulled up an article here from CNBC, so I'm just going to quickly share it, and we can go through a couple of the points that they made. 1 second. Screen share. All right.
Yeah, about the scriptures thing. The Muslims don't have it in their scriptures that Jerusalem is their rightful capital. So yeah, that's another point. Sorry to cut in.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, playing off on that, actually, isn't Jerusalem like the third holiest site in Islam? I believe. What's that?
Yeah, I was gonna. Yeah, that actually brings to what I was about to say. I was doing on the live stream yesterday, which was taken down by YouTube for copyright. I showed the speech in response to the Jerusalem move by the Gaza Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh, and in the speech he actually said that the prayers to the Muslim prayers always go first to Jerusalem and then elsewhere. Well, then I just took like a quick search on an Islamic information site run by Muslims to see it's not true. There's no mention. It is towards Mecca. Even if you're praying on in the Haram al Sharif, which is their mosque on the Temple Mount, they still pray with their backs towards the Haram al Sharif and towards the Kaaba, which is in Mecca. So I personally, I don't care about if people want to have a religion that's not mine, including Islam. I don't care. Go ahead, but don't be facetious about it. And he said that during the speech. Nobody raised their hand and said, "Oh, when I was in comparative religions in college, they actually said otherwise," or something. Nobody objected to it. They just take even blatant lies that he says, in front of an audience, and this was on Turkish TV. Okay, so I wasn't using, let's say, a Jewish media source, like what they would say, they would probably call Al Jazeera Jewish if they had to. You know, I mean, I was. Yeah, I mean, you can never pass their purity test, but they say things that are just, yeah, I mean, they're objectively false by any definition of Islam. They pray towards the Kaaba, which is not in Jerusalem. I'm sorry.
Dude, talking about like what they hold as sacred, if they can bomb a mosque which is like right next door to Mecca, the Mecca mosque, they got a Pakistani recently tried to bomb a Mecca mosque. They hold nothing sacred. They will bomb their own, like, their site. So they hold nothing sacred, and to like somehow feel offended on their behalf is like bullshit, and I don't subscribe. Like, I would like shame anybody who tried to do that. Yeah.
Well, a good example of how they don't really hold too much that it actually is sacred was that I know this has happened in many different wars, but a good example of it was during the Iraq War, was how they were using mosques as weapon caches, and they were using it as strongholds. And then what would end up happening was it would force the American soldiers to attack it, and then they could turn around and say, look, America's attacking some of our holiest sites, when they were actually manipulating the American soldiers into doing that, because well, what else could you do when you're under fire, you know? And what else can you do when there's an enemy stronghold? You have to attack it. You have to take it.
Yeah, that deserves a double damn. So yes, that's absolutely... Yeah, nobody would agree. Nobody would disagree with you there, buddy.
Yeah, that's one of the awful things, is that to a certain degree, even within Islam itself, like within the Quran, war is sanctioned between Islamic sects. Because, you know, they say, oh, well, even when all the Jews are gone, even when all the Christians are gone and everything like that, well, there can only really be one true Islam. I can't remember the exact number, but they said that there would be like 100 versions of Islam. Once Islam has spread around the world, there will be 100 versions, but only one will be correct. So even within their own texts, I mean, even killing other Muslims is justified.
How lovely! I guess
there is also that Arab supremacy thing that they have going. No, that Arabs are the most Muslim of them all, and they are more Muslim than any of these other Muslims from the rest of the world who the Arabs treat as dog shit. Now, when I first spoke to Jimso on the first podcast we had together, I had mentioned this law that they have in the Sharia, which says a Muslim may not live in a minority Muslim country where any other religion is ruling or is in majority in that country, unless he's ruling or he's doing jihad against them. So yeah, so they have a problem which is finally people are bringing to notice, and like it's being checked. And like, as I said, Hindus have no love lost for the Muslims.
And actually, right now, we're also seeing is the UN has been pretty critical of everything that's going on. Like I said, I have an article here. I'm just going to quickly pull it up, and we can see what it says. Hold on, I'm just going to screen share this. Alrighty, can you all see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So as we see here, it's from CNBC. It says the United States blocked a United Nations Security Council statement drafted Monday that called for an independent investigation into the deaths of at least 58 Palestinians along the Israeli-Gaza border. Quote, the Security Council expressed its outrage and sorrow at the killing of Palestinian civilians exercising their right to peaceful protest, a draft that the statement read, which has been seen and reported by AFP. Quote, the Security Council called for an independent and transparent investigation into the actions to ensure accountability. The U.S. has used its veto power 43 times against UN resolutions concerning Israel. Now, first things first, I do know that when we're talking about UN resolutions, there have never been more resolutions passed than that go against Israel. Despite the fact that the UN is credited for really founding the state of Israel, they've also been one of the most critical of it. And the thing in there that was obviously a whole load of crap is how they talked about these are civilians doing a peaceful protest. If you're lighting tires on fire, if you're using slings to attack the other people, that's not a peaceful protest at all. And
Jim,
also,
so how dare you slander that peaceful feminist religion? How dare you, you monster?
hey, like I said earlier, I'm just a white cisgendered bastard. So,
Yep, that's exactly. You should apologize.
but the thing is too is they were also showing. There've also been some videos and pictures coming out that have shown that these protesters that were there were using kites to try and drop firebombs inside of Israel. Not to mention, we have videos of hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinians that were rushing the border fence trying to break through it. And it's like, what? Again, you're on the when you're defending your border. What else are you supposed to do? You have to defend your border.
Yeah, it was along the Gaza Strip, I believe it was, where they actually tried to bomb sections of the wall. They were stopped, luckily. But yeah, the fact that this is a peaceful protest is absolute nonsense. There's clear footage. I think I was at work and I was watching like CBS correspondent or something like that, and he was there, and he had to have bulletproof vest and a helmet on. And the Israelis were literally having to throw tear gas, and they were using rubber bullets and everything like that to deter protesters. But this is by no means, we're just going to peacefully march to the Dome of the Rock and, sit as protest for an hour or something like that. No, they're throwing rocks, and they're being extraordinarily aggressive, like a little more than usual.
Just a tad, just a tad. But the thing is too is that I came across the other day is that a lot of the media right now are using information that came from Hamas, and that's what they're using in order to report this story. They're only going for the information from Hamas. I mean, how trustworthy is it if you're just going to one side? I mean, you would at least have to go and listen to what the Israelis have to say too, but very few of them are actually doing it. And I mean, there's something also in Islam called
still better than CNN.
I forget what taqiyya. There's something in Islam called taqiyya, which is means that you can lie. It's perfectly acceptable to lie as long as you are furthering the cause of Islam. And this just seems to me exactly what Hamas is doing. I mean, I said to Arjun before the Bold and 40 joint jumped in that if Hamas and the Palestinian soldiers really cared about the civilians and the people there, then why are they putting them up front in all this? The soldiers are the ones with the guns. They're the ones sitting in the back while they're letting all these civilians, well, quote unquote, because they're kind of getting involved in this shit, but they're letting these common people are the ones to take the reins on this, and they're using them as human shields.
Yeah,
and I'll tell you something about stone pelters too, right? The stone pelters in Palestine and in and around Israel. Now, I'll tell you about stone pelters in India. Stone pelters in India, in Kashmir, who like pelt stones at the CRPF, at the Indian Army, at like generally everything that has to do with India. These guys have a rate card, right? They have a rate card which says, we will charge this much money for throwing stones at a truck, at an army truck, at an army soldier, at a CRPF a soldier. They have rate cards. And I'm sure if you look hard enough, you will find that even the Palestinian stone pelters have a rate card. That we have so much so we will charge so much to protest. I'm sure of it. I'll be very surprised if it is not there, because you can't, because they have turned protesting and all this democracy and freedom for Palestine into a cottage industry. So if there is a cottage industry brewing, it has to pay its employees. So I'm sure there is a rate card somewhere. Yeah, I'm done. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I just had to, I was just letting my cat get up into the window. So I actually kind of missed what you said there, Arjun.
Yeah, I was saying that all these guys have rate cards, right? In Kashmir, it was found that these stone pelters had different rates for different things. Different rates for pelting stones at army trucks, at army soldiers, at the central police soldiers, at government buildings to do protests and all that. So I'm sure Palestinian protesters and stone pelters also have a rate card, and they must, because it's a cottage industry. This protest is a cottage industry, and cottage industry implies employees. So these stone pelters are obviously getting a salary from somewhere.
I've been hearing about that too, that Hamas has been paying people in order to protest against Israel right now. And sometimes, I don't know if this part's true, but apparently they're paying people to get injured, which seems a little extreme. I don't know how many people would actually take a payment to get shot, especially with the fact that you could possibly die because of it. But definitely, I definitely see how Hamas could be paying them in order to protest. I mean, it looks bad on Israel on the world stage, and that's exactly what a lot of people are acting like right now. It's like Israel defending its border. Well, now they're just, they're just trigger happy. They're just a trigger happy country, and we've already talked about how we've already mentioned about how they're what was the name? What was it called? That they're just like it's like apartheid over there. They're just a dominating force over the Palestinians, even though the Palestine has never really been an actual country in and of itself.
Well, and the Palestinians are not. Yeah, go ahead, Boris.
I was going to say that I've done comparisons between the apartheid system and the civil, structure of Israel, and apartheid was wrong. There are systems in the world in existence today that are much worse than apartheid, including I don't like. Sorry if I beat up on China, but yes, in China they have, awful discrimination in Tibet and parts of, the rural China or whatever. And this, look at does Syria practice apartheid when it didn't even give legal citizenship to Kurdish? I guess, residents up until I think 4 or 5 years ago. Is that apartheid? Because there was never an apartheid Syria campaign. And the fact of the matter is, I lived there. I served in the army there. There were Arab soldiers in the army, and other non-Jewish soldiers as well. There were Christian Russian soldiers. There were, and people debate that. Some people object to it. Some people say it should be more Jewish. Some people say that it should be more inclusive. Some people say we should let trannies into the army over there, and I think that they can. It's kind of retarded. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at civil society there, are schools segregated? Well, if you live in a mixed Arab and Jewish city, it's possible to go into a school where there are Jews and Arabs. But the fact is that a lot of these large cities like Nazareth don't have any Jews living in them. Only Arabs live in Nazareth. And if you were a Jew and you wanted to move to Nazareth, you couldn't. You couldn't. They wouldn't sell you a house, and they wouldn't rent to you. And vice versa. There's communities over there where people wouldn't rent to Arabs, but also I lived in Haifa. It's a totally mixed city. There are tons of Arab residents, Christian, Muslim, as well as what's the other religion they have there? They have some Druze there. Yeah, they do have some of them, and they live there. And there's no legal housing segregation in the large cities, and what I say that there is total like tolerance and racial harmony. There isn't anything like that anywhere you go. Anywhere. Maybe in not even in Brazil, which has more racial groups than any other country in the world. So they want to talk about apartheid, but with all due respect, apartheid was wrong. The Holocaust was wrong. It's time to stop analogizing literally everything that's happening in the world to those two things. And also, of course, slavery and Jim Crow. People bring those up all the time. There's discrimination and racial and religious hatred across the human race. And if you really want to address that, the first thing is to change yourself as an individual. It's not to go and put signs on and dress up like you're about to hijack a plane and run around and beat up Richard Spencer or something. That's not the solution to making a better world.
Well, that's what the left would have you believe.
Right. I'm putting out an alternative vision. So, we can see which one goes further.
That's radical old. We can't. By the way,
we have a viewer from India, it seems, who seems to have very strong opinions about Muslims in Palestine and Kashmir.
Oh, we also got Cabbage Patch in the chat as well. He just signed on.
Oh yeah, tell him I haven't seen him for a while. I remember last year I think I was on a live stream with him.
I will offer him if he wants to come on as well.
Yeah, and 40, you wanted to talk about the Myanmar issue, right?
Oh yeah, I had forgotten. I actually had mentioned that in chat. Yeah, it was. What were we talking about? Or no, what were you guys talking about? It was
the Rohingyas.
Yeah, I think it was. Was it sects of Sunni Salafists in India? I believe you guys were talking about that.
Yeah,
Roger.
Yeah, we were talking about.
Yeah, and one of the things I brought up is that even when Muslims are not necessarily the dominant culture, the dominant religion in specific areas, they're still prone to causing an immense amount of trouble. And I remember that I believe it was towards the tail end of 2017 or the beginning of 2018 this year, but Myanmar residents actually took up arms, and I believe they were backed by the government to some degree, or at least the government looked the other way. But they started kicking Muslims out of Myanmar into, where did they go? I think they went to Bangladesh primarily.
Yeah, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Thailand, they scattered, but a lot of them came into India as well. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so the citizens of Myanmar started kicking them out, and I made a video about it, and I did a little bit of background research, and probably one of the most absolutely shocking things, and there have been plenty of instances where Muslims start trouble, but one of the most shocking things that I saw or read about that happened was that two Buddhists were on a motorcycle or a moped or something like that, and they were just simply driving down the street. Well, as they were driving down the street, a pair of Muslims took out a machete and swung it at them. Oh yeah, they swung the machete at the Buddhists while they were driving by, and it hacked one right in the face and killed him instantly. So the moped crashed, and they proceeded to desecrate their bodies and their robes and everything. And the other the other Buddhist was actually beaten and then burned alive in the street. And this is literally just out of nowhere by a random group of Muslims. And so for literally, I think it was like 1 or 2 weeks afterwards, there were riots all around the city, of course. And there were a few riots scattered across neighboring towns as well. But it was a huge deal. And there have been multiple instances like that.
And when it comes to Buddhists, it's only acceptable if they light themselves on fire.
Yeah, of course. Peaceful religion, eh? So, but about the thing about Rohingya thing, see, Buddhists are very peaceful. So for them to get angry at Muslims, it has to be a lot to get them angry, right? Same with Hindus. So the thing about the Rohingya issue was these guys are historically from Bangladesh, right? They settled in Myanmar, and they were not integrating. They were the poorest of the poor, living in Rakhine state, and these guys, they were not integrating, not willing to integrate. Recently after they got kicked out from there, the Burmese government, they went in and they found mass graves of Rohingya Hindus. So these guys, they're wonky. So once they scattered, once the army moved in, the army got fed up of these guys. They moved in and they just started pushing them out because they were killing Buddhists, Hindus most of all actually. Rohingya genocide of Hindus is actually an underreported thing. Now,
well, if I may.
Pardon me?
Sorry. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, at the end of the day, Buddhists, they're coming back anyway. So,
Yeah, that's because Modi, the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, he went and had a chat with the Burmese saying that this is going to create a refugee crisis in the surrounding countries. Like, nobody wants Muslims flooding. The most vocal opponent of Muslims flooding into their country was actually Bangladesh, of all countries. Right? They don't want these guys coming in. Most of them are radicalized by all these all these groups which work in that area, and they don't want such sometime I'd heard these low quality Muslims. I'd heard this term somewhere, who flooding into Bangladesh. Right, the Bangladeshis hate these guys, man. So because they're more interested in a secular democracy. So so these guys, and they were very pissed off when India said no, we don't want Rohingyas in our country. Bangladesh has to be taken down. So they were very pissed off with that. So then there was some deal that happened with Bangladesh and with Burma in it, and then Myanmar agreed to take back the Rohingyas to some extent, but majority had to go. Some 400,000-500,000 had already entered Bangladesh, so that's a big problem for Bangladesh now. Yeah, go ahead.
Cabbage, were you going to interject something?
Yeah, I was going to say that, Buddhists, I mean, they believe in reincarnation, right? So not exactly a problem for a Buddhist. but no, I mean, but you're right. And don't forget, the whole Pakistan issue and, the secularization that happened, that separation. I mean, that does go back to the negotiations that, from the Raj, again, it's like this idea of two-party state thing. It doesn't tend to work out too well.
Yeah.
Well, the two-party, like the idea, if like you're talking about in Palestine, the two-state solution.
Well, I mean, just once you create divisions, like the same thing with Ireland. I mean, just look at somewhere as simple and westernized as Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, like mainland Ireland. They, even that has been in conflict since it happened. They've had to build walls and things like that, same as in Israel, and hell, China, they built a big wall. I mean, there are always going to be these conflicts. The questions are really what the approach is to resolve them. And unfortunately, the solution that people seem to be applying to Muslims is appeasement, and that's not going to work. It's just a very, very bad approach to it. The one thing that Muslims respect is, power. They really don't respect weakness.
Oh yeah, they do, because they have this thing in the Quran where they say that if you see a weak enemy, dominate him, but if you see a strong enemy who you can't overpower, take a step back. Yeah. That's there in their scripture. Yeah,
exactly.
They understand the boot very well.
Yeah, well, like we've kind of already mentioned before about that it seems like Islam is an Arab supremacy religion, really, more than anything else. And it's like anybody else who could consider themselves Muslim, if they are not Arab, are considered a second-class citizen. So it's always been about this power structure. And even when you look at the way their systems are set up in their country, it really does seem it's about one group or one government that's just dominating the other people. Yeah, it's definitely sort of like this power structure that comes from the religion. Now, I'm curious, what do you guys feel about the whole the situation that's developing between Iran and Israel ever since Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal?
I think I'll actually, I had some poutine last week, and I think my cholesterol jumped by like 30 levels, so I'm actually more afraid of dying of heart disease. So I'm not worried at all.
Or diabetes.
Yeah.
You have your foot cut off next week.
No one ever said Canadian food is healthy. But yeah, ever since this whole situation, ever since Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, which I was a big supporter of, because, Iran, it's not like they ever really were, really following the treaty, and they never signed it or anything like that. But now we see that the tensions are growing between Israel and Iran. Iran has they've each been making strikes against each other. And actually, the one thing that I've been wondering about this is, if there was a war to break out between Israel, it seems almost inevitable that America would get pulled into this conflict, since they are such a supporter of Iran.
Absolutely.
In this case, I would say, like, Iran, I have always maintained this. In fact, India always has maintained this, that the US is looking at the wrong enemy in the Middle East. Iran is not the traditional enemy. They might be shouting from the rooftop that we will kill all Jews, but that's actually a very superficial thing. Iran's problem is, because it's a Shia majority country, is that their eternal struggle between the Shia and the Sunnis. Now, each is trying to one up the other since the days of Islam's inception. Okay, if the Arabs in Saudi Arabia say that we will murder Jews, Iran will shout from the rooftop saying we will murder and like desecrate their tombs also. Like they will try and one up each. They are trying to one up the Saudis all the time. Now, if you want to solve the Iran thing, if you just like sort Saudi Arabia out, Iran will quiet down on its own, right? The Iran problem will just completely stop. Hezbollah will probably even like just disintegrate. That is the thing. If you don't have the Sunnis provoking the Shias and trying to like one up the Shias and vice versa, you will not have a Shia problem at all. Like that's how the Indian Prime Minister in our country has solved the problem. He just said we like good Muslims, and immediately what the Shias in India did was they jumped ship, they abandoned the Sunnis and they jumped ship, and they started supporting the government. So,
but Arjun, what about the Sikh Hindu conflicts? Because they still exist.
No, they don't. Actually,
really?
that died out long time back. What exists are a few posters. That's about it.
Okay, I heard it was
because you're talking about the Khalistani issue, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Khalistani issue exists, in fact, mostly in Canada and not in India anymore. Because in India the shit, like 37 kinds of shit has been beaten out of them. There is just nothing. There's nothing remaining. Like they've bombed the masculinity out of the Khalistanis.
Hey, Arjun, I wanted to say that if people want to see like definitive proof that it's not the religion of peace, wait until the Muslim radicals piss off the Jains. That would be pretty hard.
Oh God!
I mean, aren't they supposed to be like pacifism is basically everything for them?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. If they piss off the Jains, that means like there is no hope left for Muslims. There's just no hope left. There is nobody left to piss off them. There's basically nobody left to piss off. They've pissed everybody off. Finally, they've pissed off the Jains also. Like that's the kind. It's basically a sign of the Armageddon.
Well, the thing is too is that idea of the religion of peace is that, as I understand it, it's supposed to be when we're translating from English, from Arabic to English, I hear that it's a mistranslation, and it's supposed to actually stand for the religion of suppression or religion of submission.
Yeah.
That's it. There we go. Religion of submission, and that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Well, you see, that's the thing, because they have the subtax. That's the whole point. If you're not a Muslim, you can exist, but you have to pay a tax not to be a Muslim. It's a non-Muslim tax. Yeah.
Hindus paid it for centuries. We know what the jizya is. But the fact is that, the Muslim means the one who submits his will to Allah. So, so yes, it is about submission. But see, submission to God is not really a bad thing. But then if you turn around and tell other people, you also have to submit, then that's a bad thing. That's terrible. That's control, which is like the worst thing you can probably do in the spiritual path. Yeah.
Fine, it's pure fascism. Well, I mean, authoritarianism, whatever you want to call it, not fascism. Authoritarianism, I think, is a more appropriate term, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose. Like authoritarianism, you said?
Yeah, I mean, it covers all bases, that, doesn't it? You know,
yeah,
rather than
because
everyone's sick and tired of being, hearing fascism or communism or whatever. It's authoritarianism. I think we just got to call it by its actual name, whichever flavor it comes in.
And that's where my, I guess, my more libertarian side falls in, because I wouldn't call myself a libertarian, but definitely I am more against authoritarian government than any sort of other form of government. I mean, there are times where some form of authoritarianism is necessary, but all in all, like, I just don't have time for that sort of shit. Don't have time for a government telling me how to live my life,
So what are the authoritarian situations? I'd love to hear one of these.
I guess more not actually authoritarian, but how some when government power is being enforced, then it is a form of authoritarianism. And there's some areas where maybe a government does need to enforce itself, but all in all, I'm against the idea. So not an authoritarian government in and of itself, but some authoritarian characteristics in a government may be the better way to put it.
a pretext of authoritarianism.
Well, if you take something like the government enforces a law, that is a form of authoritarianism.
It's a government with a hint of authoritarianism.
Hey, cabbage,
well, could you really have a full libertarian government? The one that just stays out of your friggin' way. I don't think it's actually possible.
Yeah.
It's thinking like a perfume with a hint of authoritarian.
Kevin, I wanted to ask you, do you live in the UK?
Yeah, I'm in England, mate.
Yeah. So, I wanted to ask you about one of your authoritarian fascists, Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes, he's a friggin' fruitcake. Yeah.
That dude has got. I found out he apparently had links to Hezbollah and all these guys. At one point.
Oh yeah, he he is our Bernie Sanders. That's the reality of it. Bernie Sanders has been caught on being interviewed, complimenting Hugo Chavez and all of these different people. Well, he's had the same thing. I mean, he's communed with some of the the worst forms of authoritarianism, and he tries to justify their failures. It's like, and again, it's this idea they just didn't do it right. We just need a different attempt at this, and we'll make it right next time. It's the same old nonsense. Yeah, but he's a mental case. He really is. Jeremy Corbyn needs sectioning for his own safety.
Dude, that dude was he was like a goon, right? He was like an enforcer kind of guy. How did he rise to become the head of the Labour Party? When the entire
he was a lazy bastard. He did absolutely nothing. I mean, his entire career is. But again, the Bernie thing, just the couch surfing and things. He was never anyone of any substance before he got into. The only job he could get anywhere was bitching, and so that made him a perfect politician.
Do you like Cabbage Patch? Have you heard of this Dennis Skinner guy?
I've heard the name. Can you give me a reference? Then I might be able to.
He's like Jeremy Corbyn, but he's more he hates the Queen more, and he's also in the Labour Party.
Yeah, I know the guy you're talking about. I mean, I can't pinpoint him, but I do know now you said that. Yeah, I mean, he's there was a few. I mean, he's come out. He was in the newspapers an awful lot for a while. He did something particularly heinous.
Oh, Dennis Edward Skinner, British Labour politician.
Yeah, he did something particularly heinous a while ago, and he ended up in the newspapers constantly for it. He could never shake it off. It killed his career.
Yeah, one thing about Jeremy Corbyn that really surprised me was, in fact, I was flabbergasted was that in Glastonbury they were singing his name.
Oh God, Glastonbury. How much of a joke was that, right? There's a wall around Glastonbury, and they put posters on the wall saying "Take down walls." So all of these fucking spoiled children who spent a fortune to get there on their daddy's dime end up in a place telling people to take down walls, but they had the walls in order to stop other people getting in for free. Fuck me. There's your fucking communist friggin' ideology in a nutshell.
Yeah, communists in $10,000 suits.
Yeah, it's funny how it more or less comes from people from families that are pretty well off, eh? I guess me, as I've watched it, I just can't help but feel it's these people who don't want to see that they're part of the better part of society. They don't want to see themselves as, if you want, part of the problem. So they like to put themselves in as part of the victim group, just so that they don't have to sit there and take responsibility for the fact that if we are going on the left-wing narrative of these people, the rich being the problem, that they are the problem.
Yeah, and they are the ones who are, the champagne socialists are going to be, once they actually have to earn a living, that's going to be when the opinions change. It's like anyone who, when you have, your parents cut you off, when, you don't get that freebies, then all of a sudden you start realizing just what it means, to have to be self-supporting and not have everybody telling you how special you are. You are as special as you can make yourself. And they've got a crash coming, these people. All these ideologues, because their ideology won't pay the bills. You can't pay your bills with ideology.
Yeah,
They're professional thinkers. They're professional thinkers.
I wanted to say about.
Well, think your way out of the gas bill.
I wanted to say about Jeremy Corbyn. I remember Sargon of Akkad's like he did like a play-by-play analysis of that stupid Glastonbury speech where he's just shouting at the crowd of morons.
Yeah.
And then in November, I saw this article from The Independent about, and I don't know if you're an Oasis fan, Cabbage Patch, but I am. And
I like the music, not particularly, not the guys.
Not their personalities, but Noel Gallagher was like, "Fuck Jeremy Corbyn, he's a communist." And then you go to the Oasis. So go to the comments, and they're like, "Fuck Noel Gallagher." This is The Independent, so it's all a bunch of like of
lefties.
Just remind me,
boners,
Noah is
whatever.
the crazy one or Liam is the crazy one? Which one is the crazy one, Noah or Liam?
Liam's the crazy one.
Yeah.
And the people were like, seems he has a single word in his vocabulary, and that is fucking. Please send him to. This is the biggest selling British artist of the '90s.
Yeah,
dude, I'm a huge Oasis fan.
I am too. I love Oasis. I could never, I don't care about their politics. They're my favorite.
They're great musicians.
Yeah.
That's the fact. Yeah, they're great performers as well.
But cuckoo bananas.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I never really got into their music.
I think I have some stuff to do, but I'll check in later with you guys about some stuff I'm working on.
All right.
Well, you got some fapping to do. He's off to fap. Be honest.
Speaking of which, all right.
So you're taking off, Bold?
All right, Bold.
Later, bud. Does anyone have any other topics they want to cover?
Yeah, one more thing I wanted to ask Cabbage Patch was about Theresa May's new choice for Home Secretary.
Home Secretary. Look, to be honest with you, the government at the moment is a fucking disaster, and they are just running around chasing their tails. They don't know what the fuck they're doing because of the Brexit thing. They have no idea. You've got the people in the cabinet are totally split. You got no commitment to a particular policy that they're committed to. So the whole thing.
Yeah, but will she survive though? Like, she doesn't seem to be too strong a leader. Like, no offense here, but like I'm like from an analytical standpoint, like she doesn't seem to ooze that strength like a leader should. Like, give a strong direction to the country, especially post a event like Brexit, right?
Look, she is no Margaret Thatcher, and she hasn't got a backbone. She doesn't believe in what she's doing. But she's basically got a mandate that she doesn't want to implement, and so she's doing everything she can to appease everyone and achieve nothing. So she's a clusterfuck. I mean, she's basically at this point, she's only there, like for affirmative action, right? If she didn't have a vagina, they would have kicked her out a long time ago, because she is totally incompetent.
Because when she gave her speech after the snap polls, like the second time she got re-elected, she gave a speech where she said that Britain's security policies are outdated. We have to have a hard look at that again. What kind of speech is that? That's basically showing that we are weak.
Look, she's a fucking lunatic, and she doesn't have any sense whatsoever. If she had any sense, the last thing she would have done, unless her intention was to fuck up the Brexit, she took a non-partisan issue like the referendum, and she turned it into a political, event. And a referendum is non-partisan. It's just you can get to vote. Doesn't matter whether you're Labour or Tory or anything else, right? You can just vote, and that's the answer. And then she took that and she tried to corrupt it she thought that she could take those votes to reinforce her position. Very bad tactical mistake, because you can't take a partisan thing and make it partisan. Because once you do that, you split the vote again. Because the people are not voting on the Brexit thing. They're voting on who they think is going to run the country. You know, very different issues. The Brexit thing was one thing. And that was, you know, and should have been seen in isolation. The silly bitch then thought that she could utilize that to gain, you know, to garner her validity as the prime minister. And it blew up in her face. It was a stupid decision. And I said that before, you know, when she announced it, I lost my shit on that one. You know? So, no, the woman is a disaster. She's doing everything and anything she can in order to fuck up Britain's position within the Brexit, you know, the whole Brexit negotiations.
Yeah.
So who's an alternative to her? Within the Conservatives? Who's the alternative to her? Like plausible.
Boris Johnson.
No, it's not Boris. Boris, God Almighty, Boris is like Britain's versions of Trump. Oh no! Well, I mean,
that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's not necessarily.
I know, but I'm just saying he's crazy haired. No, the guy is massively intelligent. He really is. But I mean, Boris only came on to the Brexit thing at the last minute. He was a Remainer until he realised that he was on a losing field.
Really?
So yeah. People got to remember that.
Ooh,
so
I did not know that.
Yeah.
What about Rees-Mogg?
Rees-Mogg, I would like to see. He's about the closest that we're going to get, and he is very statesman-like. You know, he's got that reserve, and he's got the good delivery, and he's got a good sense of humor, and he just sounds good, really.
You got to pull, like, Conservatives have to pull their shit together. Otherwise, you don't want Jeremy Corbyn as the Prime Minister of the country.
God, if that ever happens, I'm going to have to leave.
Oh, just letting you guys know. Just let you know, Bold said a few things in the chat after he left. The first thing he said was "fap fap fap," and then he says, which he said,
"Good man."
That was quick, under 6 seconds. Then he says, "Cabbage Patch, stop mentioning Theresa May. You're killing the mood."
Oh, sorry. I won't say nothing more.
My bad.
I don't want to interrupt your fapping. Fap away, my friend.
Oh.
Well, I was thinking I found one more article we could probably cover before we sign off, and it's from the College Fix. Let me just give a screen share real quick. Alrighty, hold on. There we go. It says, "No whites allowed. Day of absent lives on despite last year's uproar at Evergreen State College. Students at the embattled Evergreen State College, which made national headlines last year after it hosted an event that asked white people not to come on campus for a day of absence, have organized a new iteration of the controversial event despite administrators' efforts to shift gears." And it just goes on to say about how some of the events, that there's a few different events being held, and that this was the wrong screen. It's a few different events are being held, and then some of them are saying that all skin colors are available, while others are being restrictive and saying only people of color. So we're not allowed on this event, eh?
Now is that people who are of color or people who associate with being of color?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I just think it's hilarious because, you know, we spent so long fighting back in the 60s and a little bit before. We were fighting against the Jim Crow laws. We were fighting against, well, you know, not us, but they were fighting against Jim Crow laws, fighting against segregation. And then the more and more I look at it, it seems like people of color, which I hate that term to begin with, are the ones actually looking to return to segregated areas now.
Oh, look at Berkeley. I mean, they were demanding segregated dormitories.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that not too long ago, it was not even at Evergreen, and maybe not even at Berkeley, but it was a lot of black students were calling that they wanted segregated. They wanted segregated dorms. They wanted segregated classrooms. They just wanted everything to go back to being segregated all over again.
Yeah. And once they get it, they'll fucking bitch about how they're segregated and that they're underclass, and then they'll demand integration again. It's like some fucking implosion explosion. It's like this perpetual motion machine.
See, if I may interject here, like, for one point, like, see, if basic politics, like politics 101, like, demands, like, if your opponent is like trying to make say in this case race an issue, like you should not make race an issue, right? If you want to counter it, make something which is larger. Like that's the thing behind the game theory, right? Like if you're playing a zero-sum game, like if your goal is an infinite goal, you will win if against somebody who's playing a finite goal, right? Like segregation is definitely a finite goal compared to, say, if you make it about values, then that's an infinite goal compared to, say segregation, which is a finite. So yeah, there needs to be a refocusing as far as like conservatives and their strategy. Definitely, at least in my reading.
Well, it's just first of all, I find it funny because they'll actually find a strong ally in the alt-right, which is funny enough. But this idea that they always like to push the narrative about how racist our society is, how racist white people are. Yet these are the people calling for segregation in and of itself, and these are the people that have no problem coming out and saying, "White people, you're not allowed in where we're going."
Yeah, but that's because it's so easy when you cluster everyone together under a title and you say black people, like as if every black person is the same, every white person is the same, every white heterosexual male is a inherent threat. It's categorization without validation of any. You don't need any validation. In fact, this is why you're finding a lot of kickback now. Because a lot of these people don't want to be clustered together, that the social justice warriors, thought that they had on their side. And there's a lot of people now saying, no, actually, I don't want to be associated. I mean, even the trans people are doing that. In fact, most of the trans people are actually upset about how they've been co-opted by the social justice warriors. Because they don't want attention, piled on them. They don't want all of this extra shit that they get because they are clumped as like the weirdest kind of characters. So
at the big, yeah.
Sorry, I'm just saying, so at the end of the day, that these people just co-opt entire cultures with a single, generic canopy.
No, the problem.
And it's a very easy way of then claiming that you're standing for something.
See,
it's like saying I stand for no rape. Well, that's easy. You're going to incorporate most people.
Yeah. See, that's the problem with identity politics, right? They somehow with race, with gender, with all these things, they certainly say that they're basically saying that people would rather identify with their physical attributes than whatever mental attributes, talents, or spiritual aspirations they have, right? Right. So they are not like human beings don't have any higher aspirations at all, other than identifying with their body. That's a stupid argument.
It's all superficial. I mean, that's what most of this social justice shit is about. It's it's purely superficial. It's about the color of your skin. It's about how you present yourself, right? It's not about this. Again, it's like that.
Oh, you're cutting out there, Cabbage.
Hello? Oh, okay. I thought that was just me.
No. Yeah, I don't know if I can't even hear Cabbage anymore at all.
Yeah, neither can I.
Cabbage, you may have to re-enter if I think your connection's bad or something.
F5.
But yeah, this is like this whole idea of just like characterizing people in these categories is stupid. And the one thing about this sort of the progressives that take on the social justice warrior status is the fact that how easily they will turn on others when they don't agree with their philosophy. It doesn't matter whether they happen to be a minority or not. Before you guys jumped in, when I was talking to Arjun, I was saying how just the other day there was a black guy who was in the Cheesecake Factory wearing one of Donald Trump's "Make America Great Again" hat, and he ended up getting assaulted by the staff, and they were calling him the N-word and everything like that. I think they ended up calling him a porch monkey too, but this is not something new. We've seen plenty of times where many people have been called these words because they don't adhere to the norms. One I can definitely use as example is Larry Elder, who has constantly been defamed both by the black community and people on the left simply because he's a Republican.
See, you become what you obsess about, right? If you obsess about race, you become a racist. It's as simple as that.
No, that's a pretty good way to put it. Because it's time and time again we hear the people who are actually say they're more against something actually turn out to be the way that exactly the opposite. That's why in my personal life, when somebody is so adamant they're either for something or against something, it actually more or less makes me believe that they are in the opposite camp. That if they say like I don't see race and they're so adamant about not seeing race, well, these are more likely the people to criticize someone based on their race. And this doesn't have to be just for race, but in anything,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. See, like that like sort of spreads to other parts of our life as well. Like whenever we obsess, if we obsess about like whatever, if over the negative things that happened in our childhood, we never really grow past that, right? So. So if as a movement you're trying to keep people obsessed about their physical attributes, about their like whatever they were born with naturally, then that becomes a problem. Like then you're reducing people to the same level as animals, right? That people are a sum of their physical attributes. Like they just eat, sleep, like sexual intercourse. That's all. That's all they are. Their skin color. That's all they are. Their like physical features. That's all they are. Right? That's not a like a workable argument or even an ideology that you can base a movement on.
No, but the thing is, yes, but you can use it for spoiled kids, telling them that they can be anything they want to be. That I mean, it's a very easy thing to sell to young people. Look, socialism only works on the younger people. If you look at the demographics of socialists versus sane people.
Yeah, but there's an easy solution to that, right? You beat your kids. Like that's the easiest solution. They talk back, you beat them. they try to act entitled, you beat them. I'm just joking, but seriously, you have to discipline your kids, right? If parents are airheads, then their children will also be airheads, right?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely true.
Yeah, well, you pass on your traits, don't you? I mean, your children learn and emulate, their parents.
Ideally, you pass on your traits unless your spouse is having an affair.
This is also some of the dangers that I've seen that come out of the participation awards. Everybody deserves a medal just for even showing up. I mean, one thing that I always got in school, which I never cared about once, is I always got the attendance award. I went to almost all my classes. I very, very rarely missed school, and I almost never skipped. But every year I'd be on the list for the attendance award, and I could care less. It's like it's the bare minimum. You show up and you're supposed to get a medal for that. That's not the way the real world works. I have never in my life had my boss give me a bonus for showing up for work. They've only given me bonuses if I put in the extra work in there.
Well, this is one of the big problems that employers have now, is that how do you differentiate people when everyone gets an A star? Everyone gets an A+. So how are you supposed to differentiate those people? And then, and then they say, well, you have to have a quota of this amount of people and a quota of that amount of people. And, and then they're all pretty much worthless because they've all been given a, commendation medal. I mean, where does it go? I mean, that's one of the things that came out of, the Google thing, where he's saying that it shouldn't, where's the meritocratic system gone? Where's the evidence? Where's the proof of achievement?
People need an incentive. People need an incentive to excel.
Yeah.
Humanity's very survival and progress depends on like a small group of people excelling in their fields, right? So if you give everybody the medal for participation, then people lose the incentive to excel. So
yes, exactly. I mean, it's de-incentivization. The hideous American word. But
I was just going to say that, in fact, one thing that's happening right now, and I don't know if this is a countrywide thing or just in my province right now, and I think I mentioned to Arjun off air before we started.
It might just be in your head.
Well, the fact is that kids now in elementary school can no longer fail. That even if they get an F, they are pushed on to the next grade regardless. And because of it, we're having like half the kids that are in school are not meeting the mathematics standard.
I would call that child abuse. I really would. I would call that actual fucking child abuse, because you are failing those children. That is a hideous thing to do.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was in grade 10, I failed math and I had to go to summer school throughout all of July. And the one thing I remember saying to myself once I got out is I never want to do that again, because I lost like half my summer. And before I knew it, oh, you got to take off? Oh, yeah, he had to take off.
Oh,
Yeah,
take care,
so
mate.
yeah, he was I lost half my summer to that, and then before I knew it, I was already back in school for grade 11, and it sucked because I really felt like I didn't get much of a break. But because of that, the next 2 years in my math, I at least focused on it. I was never great with numbers, but I focused on it hard and made sure I didn't fail because I never wanted to go back to summer school. It was an incentive to do well.
Yeah, well, I had the same thing when when I was doing things. We called them O levels. They call them GCEs or something now. They keep changing the names. But the first time I took my exams, I really wasn't engaged with the process. You know, I didn't really understand what the consequences were. And when I fucked up, then I got a kind of realization of, you know, I understood that I'd messed up with my future. I had it kind of drilled home to me by a few friends and, you know, family, that this is not just about you not getting a good grade. This is about your potential future. And I went back, and it was actually mathematics. And there was a very cool guy at the school, a Chinese guy, typical. And he ended up, I went from an E to a B in mathematics just because of that guy's, you know, tutelage. I got more out of a fellow student than I did out of the teacher, weirdly enough. But then again, you know, I actually went and sought out the help. You know what I mean? I recognized I had to go and fix my own problem. I didn't get someone else to fix it for me. You know what I mean? I had to do the retakes. So
see, like I got a story about England, like a personal story. Like many years ago, I lived for a year in England, and currently my parents live in England. So, so the thing is that when I studied in England, yeah, I was in a city called Gloucester. So
yeah, Gloucester. Oh, I worked there, mate.
Oh, really? Like I mean, you currently live in Gloucester?
Yeah, I worked in a place called Clearwell. It's about 10 miles, 20 miles outside of Gloucester.
Oh,
yeah.
So I was studying in a school, grammar school called Crypt, the Crypt School. So, over there, so when I was studying, the first thing I noticed was that how easy it was to study there, right? Because the difficulty level of the subject was not as intense as compared to back home. So definitely there is a definite issue. I wouldn't say it's a drop of standard. It is a more relaxed way of education, but a relaxed way of education is again sort of de-incentivizing like children to excel and to this is what I understand. Like because Indians go do, as I said to Jimso a little while back, that Indians go everywhere all over the world and they do well because we give a lot of emphasis to our education. So when I went to England and I studied it, it was quite easy, like for me, because I went from.
Well, Arjun, yeah. We can prove this because of, you know, if you look at the British NHS, I mean, you effectively maintained our entire NHS. You know,
my dad works.
But I mean, throughout this whole thing.
By the way,
there you go. You see, so I rest my case. We have evidence.
Yeah. So yeah. But the fact is, yeah. Even though it was easy, I did not think that the children were any dumber. Like for example, the children were quite my classmates and all. They were quite intelligent boys. They were not like they were not these dumb brats. Though it was a grammar school, it wasn't a comprehensive. So there might be some difference in that. But yeah. But if because the teachers were quite nice, they enforced a strict disciplined approach to education. So it's not that making studies easier is sort of the problem. It is more about the incentivizing or de-incentivizing of the subject.
Well,
like if you're pass regardless, then yeah, then why educate yourself? Why stimulate your mind at all?
Well, I'd also say that one of the major problems that we have now is, you know, with the methodology of teaching in this country. You know, like everything is again, men, you know, boys and girls learn in different ways. And the methods that they utilize now are all about penalizing any kind of male, you know, activity or, you know, investigation or whatever. It's about, you know, like everything is basically channeled towards trying to educate the female, because you know, they're working. I don't know, you know, they have to equalize everything. So I mean, you can see this even in the tech industries, where they're now modifying the courses in order to make it more female appropriate, right? As if that, I mean, how is technology male or female or whatever, you know? It really doesn't make any sense. And so when you're looking at the education system as a whole, they're changing the structure of it so that it is making it easier for women to get the actual grades.
Yeah, but
they really are.
Yeah, but
right,
in fact,
because this is the, you know, like they're changing. I mean, they're modifying everything because of quota systems. It isn't about your ability. It's about how do you fall within a quota system.
Yeah, but the weird thing,
right? I mean, it's like removing the IQ test and just saying what portion of your DNA is what, and that's going to be your, you know, your score.
See, but that's a weird thing, right? Because in England is more or less 100% educated. You don't need to really.
Well, you haven't been here recently.
I'm not talking about the Muslims, the Muslim immigrants. Let's not lump them in with you.
You need to come and visit again. You'll be quite surprised.
Okay. Easy.
Disappointed.
No, but seriously, but there is more or less 100% education in England. The fact is that England is not an African country where you need to make like serious overtures to make.
No, like, but we're making it one.
Well, that's debatable, but dude, I'm not getting into that debate. So the fact is that if you treat yourself, if you treat England where more or less all men and women, all boys and girls are educated, that becomes that you need to restructure your education to sort of like focus on women, as if women have not been taken care of by the education system, which is a complete bogus like assumption, right? So,
but it's the change in the dynamic of the teaching process that I'm explaining to you, right? I mean, it's like, right, say for example, like boys and girls, they learn in different ways. You know, weirdly enough, there would be a decent segregation, you know, because guys do get distracted by girls, so it's much easier to teach them within, and then they compete amongst each other, and then they actually achieve a lot more, which is why public schools work well, right? If you look at, I mean, you go back to the 18th century, and all the boys going off, you know, being taught in public schools in, you know, completely closed, you know, male environments. It is actually a competitive environment. Everybody ups their game. You know what I mean? Yeah. So then you get the best out of people. But then when you weight it to the other side, you know, then you end up with this idea that, you know, like if a boy is hyperactive, well, they classify as, you know, OCD or ADHD or whatever the fucking hell they want to pull out of the latest DNC, you know. Oh, sorry, what the fuck is it called? You know, the medical book that they keep expanding. You know, so you claim that they got OCD or ADHD. You're actually drugging the boys to become, you know, I mean, you're retarding their, you know, their ability to be themselves. And of course, I mean, if you look at any of these ADHD drugs, they're all psychotropic drugs, right? They're not exactly going to be.
Yeah, I actually have ADHD.
To the learning experience.
So you do. Yeah, I do have ADHD.
Do you really, or you just like?
No, I don't.
I mean, be honest.
I'm being on the drug for like years now. So the fact is, I can attest to what you're saying. Because methylphenidate, the drug which I'm taking, if you take more than 6 tablets a day, 6 10-milligram tablets a day, more than 60 milligrams a day, if you take methylphenidate in those doses, you are likely to hallucinate. So yeah, I can attest to what you're saying.
Well, there you go. So, and the thing is that we're giving these to children where their brains haven't even fully formed yet. You know, like where I mean, they're not even really in that position. But and why? The point is, why are we giving them to these kids at this point?
ADHD
You know,
drugs,
we're giving them
highly addictive drugs. Those are, and if you give them to young children, you cannot give methylphenidate to young children. That is actually like a thing. Like methylphenidate is like, if you process it, it is like 1 or 2 steps away from creating methamphetamine. Like crystal meth is like 1 or 2 step chemical process away from methylphenidate.
Well,
so
on top,
it's a dark substance because of that, and it is highly addictive as an opioid. Yeah.
And on top of that, we don't know what the future effects on these children will be. I mean, they tell kids that they shouldn't, you shouldn't smoke pot until you're 25 because your brain is developing until you're 25, and then you don't know what sort of they can develop. It can affect the development of the brain. But now we're willingly putting even younger children on these drugs. We don't really have testing into what the future effects will be, but yet it's completely acceptable.
Exactly.
Yeah,
but the thing is, but Arjun, the point I was making was why are they putting these kids on it? Right? They're not putting the girls on it. Who are they putting this on? It is a mass majority is on the boys, because the boys are the ones who claim, that the DSM, whatever it's called, claims that these kids have a disorder, and they're just not like being allowed to be themselves. There is a different teaching technique required for boys than there is for girls, and I tell you now. The teachers that I remember were the male teachers, right? They were the ones that inspired me. They were the ones that actually, I could relate to. That's nothing. It's that, you can't say, well, I'm being sexist about that. I mean, that's just something which lodges in your brain, right? As a developing child. This is the guy I remember this guy. This guy was a total witch. She was a pain in the ass. And, but they're putting, it is mainly, if you look at the proportion of drugging of children, it is disproportionately male.
Yeah.
Disproportionately male in a big way. And why are they doing that? Because they want the boys to act like girls, right? Or they want them effectively redundant. They're taking them out of the competition, right? They're removing the competition through drugging.
Yeah, see, the boy. Right? It's also that boys tend more to have focus-related disorders, right? Because boys are very active.
Only at a young age. Only at a young age.
No, even at an older age,
they get past.
Men have that drive to be something, to do something, because they're men. There's a gender difference here. Like women are more quiet.
Exactly. And that's what they want in a classroom. You see, if you have a teacher who engages you, then they will be more animated and things. They want people who will just sit there and be blank canvases and just be fed information. That's it, right? They want the sort of Borg structure, right? And so if the kid actually has an imagination, or, has a, can you imagine, right? Going back in the day, to say like the 1800s or 1700s, when people were going out, the adventurers, the people who were going down to, say, the South Pole, you couldn't do that now. Why? Because that kid would have been drugged up before he even had the idea to do it. It'd be like, well, you couldn't possibly do anything beyond your, there would be nothing.
You can't drug children.
Can you imagine Sir Isaac Newton, in a classroom today? He'd be fucking pumped up on Prozac like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Well, on top of this, they've also taken away hands-on education in schools, which is mainly the way that boys learn. We learn better with the hands-on, and the structure of sitting down and listening to someone speak is much more effective for women. And even in some courses that should be more hands-on now, that's exactly what it's turned into, and it's for the sake of benefiting the women. I mean, just not too long ago, there was a report that came out that talked about, I think it was the SATs in America. They were going to give women extra time on the test in order to make sure that they can match the standards.
But that's the thing, you see, that's exactly. But it was in what disciplines? It was in STEM.
Yes.
Okay, because they couldn't keep up in STEM. And that's the thing. You see, the guys got involved in STEM because chemistry and physics and, all that kind of stuff. You got plenty of interactivity. You got something where you're involved in it. You know, with biology, you get to cut a frog up. You know, in physics, you know, you get to blow shit up or whatever. You know, you get to play with stuff. So that's why guys are so much better at STEM. But what did they have to do? They had to tilt it to the side. And that's what I'm saying. And this is what the drugging is. It's the equivalent. They are doing the same thing, but they're doing it in a blanket fashion. It's dangerous.
Oh, absolutely.
Really fucking dangerous.
And the thing is, too, is there's been numerous reports that have come out when they're talking about the gender differences in STEM. And in areas such as Europe, Sweden and the Netherlands, other areas around that area, where they have tried to do everything they can in order to make a level playing field. So take out the environmental factors between men and women. Less women go into STEM, which more or less proves that it is a preference choice.
Exactly. But then again, apparently now women aren't allowed to choose if other women tell them that they're not allowed to choose.
See, the thing about STEM is...
Because choice is a choice of someone else.
See, may I make a point here that about STEM? See, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, you need a very solid analytical mind for studying these subjects, which men are naturally born with those analytical minds. Not that women are precluded from it, but less women tend towards analytical subjects.
Well, we have a predisposition. That's the thing, a predisposition. So if that is, if that can be invigorated, But
now let me bring in another example over here. That politics is another subject where you have to use your analytical mind. And if you notice, men who are politicians do practice politics in a very different way than women who do politics.
How so?
Yeah, because men are more geared towards sort of have the doing approach. They will have the doing approach, while women will try to have that charm approach. It's a thing. It's a thing that I've noticed. I don't know how true it is because I need to watch it more. But it is something that has occurred to me, that there is a difference between how men politic and how women politic. So
it is. Yeah, no. Women want to talk everything into the ground. Men want to get the deal signed, right? Get it done, dust it, stamp it, get it out of the way. It's about production.
And there is nothing more left brain than politics. There's nothing more left brain than politics.
Yeah.
And actually, that's why I think we tend to see more women that will go into left-wing politics, is because that is definitely one that is more based on emotion, which seems to appeal to them more than the analytical side, which is more of the conservative side.
And also, they have lower standards. Did you see that study that said that hot chicks tend to be Republican and, conservative?
Yeah, I did see that. I did see that, yeah. And that was something like 2 or 3 years ago that Milo Yiannopoulos said when he was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and I wasn't sure about that till I saw that study come out. I was like, oh, shit.
Yeah, I did check it myself.
That was such a silly comparison.
It's true the other way around, too, that apparently also there's more likely more attractive men will end up on the right wing of politics than on the left wing of politics.
That's right.
As well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Really? Andrew Scheer is better looking than Justin Trudeau? Are you telling me that?
Justin Trudeau, oh my God. Yeah, but attractive to what? Another soy boy? Or
well, the thing is, even if Scheer it doesn't necessarily have the looks of Trudeau, I guarantee you more women would probably want to get with Scheer for the sole fact that he has those more masculine qualities, while Trudeau has those much more feminine qualities. Most women don't want that sort of thing in a man. Most people want the opposite of what their gender is.
Even you don't believe what you just said. Even you don't believe what you just said.
No.
Well, actually, I do actually. Because, the thing is even if women are
I'm kidding, dude. I'm kidding.
Oh, okay. What I was going to say on that is, even if women are more prone to go to someone like Justin Trudeau off the start because maybe he's more attractive, chances of someone like him holding down a relationship are much more fewer.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the moneymaker. Yeah.
And the thing is, Trudeau is the the guy that the girl goes to when she's just been dumped by her boyfriend. You know what I mean? He's the cry on the shoulder sort of character.
Exactly. And
then he's the guy who wants to fuck you, and probably will end up raping you because he's such a soy boy, right? They have a tendency to do that, right?
Cabbage is the government.
He just wants to be your friend. They're more likely to come on my door, mate. You don't see, you've seen what's going on over here.
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
true.
Count Dankula.
They're also trying to change the law to make it like something like what Count Dankula did. You can go to prison for like 7 years.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, Count
Yeah,
Dankula.
yeah.
That was Count Dankula was from which country? Remind me, I don't remember exactly.
You know
What's
what I
that?
love was you don't remember Count Dankula? What happened?
No,
with
I
him?
don't remember
Are you
which
serious?
country he was from.
Oh,
No,
it was from
which
From
country?
Scotland. Scotland.
Ah,
Which
yeah.
is part
He
of
was the
Britain
one
now.
who like the Nazi dog, right?
Yeah.
He was like Nazi saluting dog, and he got like a court case was put on him.
That was a
Yeah,
funny
but
freaking video.
I thought the joke was funny. It's like my wife's dog is, you know, I mean, I thought the gas the juice thing was a little step too far, but the Heil Hitler was kind of funny. You know what I mean? Just like when Heil Hitler, then it did that was funny. The gas the juice thing to get it kind of running in a circle was a bit, but even so, the concept of the joke, the structure of the joke was good. You know, well, I'm used to piss off my girlfriend.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, I do the
can't hear
same
it.
thing. Oh, he was just saying the structure of the joke was meant to piss off his wife, and that's one of my favorite activities.
Yeah.
I love getting underneath my wife's skin. The more she
There you
gives me
go.
those dirty looks, the harder I laugh. I completely understood where he was coming from with that joke,
Yeah.
especially being his wife's dog. It's like, of course she was going to be like, what the fuck, Dankula?
And dude, if I were a judge, I would have the heart to convict somebody called Count Dankula. Like, dude, his name is awesome. I would have the heart to convict him. Come on, come on.
But the thing is, I mean, and plus, it was never intended for. I mean, it was part, you know, apart from the few people that he had at the time. I mean, it was only that thing that went viral that gave him any kind of, you know, exposure or whatever. So it wasn't like he was, you know, he was sending it out, you know, into the interwebs in order to try and offend anyone. His girlfriend wasn't offended. Yet this is the problem that we got with this.
Didn't
The state took it upon themselves to take offense. In actual fact, they actively went out to find somebody to take offense, right? They got a report from a newspaper, and then the police force went out to find a Jewish person who might take offense to it. So the police actually caused the offense by showing it to that person, because that person didn't know it existed and would probably have never seen it. You know what I mean? And if they had, they probably wouldn't have said they were offended anyway.
What I thought was even worse than the Dankula case was the fact that even before the Dankula case went to trial, I remember seeing an article come out from the UK, which was talking about how police were trying actively to find an online troll who said mean things about the Muslim grooming gangs in the UK. They weren't going after the grooming gangs, but they were trying to find this guy because he said something offensive about these grooming gangs.
Oh, you want to hear an even weirder one?
Go.
There is a girl who from Liverpool. She posted up some lyrics, right? A friend of hers had died in a car crash. And there was a particular song, and those lyrics resonated with her, you know, kind of, you know, she wanted to express herself. So she posted it up on a private Facebook. And it happened to include the word nigger. And it was a rap song, right? And so it was, I can't remember which particular tune it was. And she ended up in court. She's now got a community service order, and she has to pay a fine.
Jesus.
I'm not kidding you. I mean, we are in 1984 here in this country now, with the way the police are doing this stuff. They are going hardcore mind control, thought control police now. It really is getting that bad. People don't get it.
Cabbage.
I mean, we have to laugh about it, but we know it's happening, you know.
Yeah. Cabbage, tell me if you remember this case. Sorry, Cabbage, you'll know this case. Tell me if you remember. Few years back, I heard they busted this pedophilia ring in Nottingham within the child protective services. It was in Nottingham County, I think. Like where these British Pakistani guys were in charge of the different what do they call the homes where they keep the children?
Oh, you mean you mean foster home? Oh, I know what you mean. God, yes.
So So these British Pakistani officials who were in charge of the child protective services in Nottingham, they were in cahoots with the police, weren't they? The commissioner had to resign.
Oh yeah. Oh, we've had so
Right.
many of them, mate.
Right.
That's what makes it so
Yeah, so-
disturbing. It's not like any of these are the
So-
first. That we're on like our thousands. I don't know. Maybe there's going to be like a £1 million wonder or something. You know, like a million. Somebody who gets the 10,000th, you know, abuse manages to get a prize or something. I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, just look at Telford. Look at, you know, Rotherham. You know, happening in Newcastle. I mean, every major city in this country is now finding these things happening, and the police have done nothing. They've done nothing.
Yeah, they were partly complicit also in some cases, right?
Yes,
Till
exactly.
Keith Vaz went after those guys, nothing was happening.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Oh, yeah.
it's a sad. See, like the Islamic community tries to play the victim all the time. Like, oh, these guys are racist. They're discriminating against us. But the fact is, as I told Jimso at the beginning of this podcast today, that before you guys joined in, I was telling them, to overcome mistrust, you have to be responsible. If you are responsible, if you are like a responsible member of society, if you're contributing, if you're productive, then there will be no mistrust. If there is mistrust, then obviously one party is not taking responsibility for their community and how they represent their community.
Yeah, but Arjun, the thing is, unfortunately, today there's no accountability. There is no responsibility. You know, these policies and these, you know, these things can be. Well, I mean, obviously they were known about and they were just over. You know, they were just ignored. And the accountability and responsibility, you'll never do it. If you pin it to somebody, it'll probably be some low-level, you know, subordinate somewhere that didn't sign the right piece of paper, or, you know, they'll claim that it was somebody who, you know, if an MP resigns over this, I'd be very surprised. There is no responsibility, so they can keep doing it. They don't care. Clearly, they don't care.
You guys need a V for Vendetta moment.
Seriously, we do.
Yeah, dude, but you need a strong. See, you need a politician who is not Theresa May to sort of lead you guys into the next phase, right? If you already did the Brexit, that's one part of it. The next phase is that you have to take back your way of life. Yeah. Like my mom told me this story. Like they live in Crewe, right? Which is in the northern part of England. So
yeah, I know Crewe. Yeah, they on Trent.
Yeah, so they had a landscaping like guy who was coming and doing the garden for them. Like they were remodeling the garden or something was happening. She had this conversation with the gardener saying that this was before Brexit, right? She asked him that why do you want Brexit? So like he gave some non-committal answer, like a very neutral answer to why Brexit was a thing. So then she asked him a pointed question about, is it to do with the Islamic immigrants that you're getting? So he got a little ruffled. He was a middle-aged white guy, so he got a little ruffled. So when my mom just told him that, listen, Hindus have the greatest experience with Muslims. We know exactly what they are. We have suffered under them for more than 1,000 years. We know exactly what they are. Absolutely. You have to sort of safeguard your values, British values. You have to safeguard them. You have to safeguard your way of life. If you don't, these guys will just come in and one day declare England to be an Islamic republic, right? And then they will not treat you the way you treat them. So we know exactly where they are. So this guy very predictably says, but every time we say something, they call us racist. So my mom says, you have to initially, the past is the past. Initially, you might have to bear it. You have to just grit and bear it. But eventually a time will come when name calling will not work anymore. And then the real emotions of the majority of white community will come out. And when that comes out, then that is when the real change starts coming into effect.
Mate, I went to school with you know, with several Hindu, you know, kids that, you know, that had grown up in the UK and everything. And we were in dormitories together. So, you know what I mean? It's literally living cheek to jowl. And they were pretty much the most British people, you know, they really were, because their families aspired to something. And the trouble is that we've lost the aspiration now. There is nothing to aspire to. I mean, what, you want to aspire to, you know, the sort of trans idea? You know, I mean, it used to be that, you know, like, when somebody said, you know, that's not cricket, you knew what it meant, right? It's just not playing the game. It's not, that's not reasonable. It's not fair and things like that. There used to be a degree of standards that was recognized, and they have gone. Yeah, they've gone. We've allowed these ideologies, like some kind of maggot or whatever, to eat the thing from the inside out.
So who has to fight for British values?
Well, we do. You, me, everyone. I mean, like everyone else. You know, I mean, anyone who recognizes what British values actually mean, and they are certainly not Sharia law, and they're certainly not, you know, the Muslim creed. You know, but we don't need the Quran. It's antithetical to everything that it is to be British. It is everything antithetical to be British. You know, if they want to be British, fine, be British, but that means adopt the standards and the qualities and the principles, not this religious text, you know, but they won't do that because these are barbarians. Listen, these people are barely able to write their own fucking names. You know, they're using thumbprint things for immigrants because they don't even know how to write their name, and they think that we're importing anything of use, but we're doing it because we're big-hearted. Yeah,
and that in the end will get us all killed.
No, I tell you the irony there.
We're signing our own death warrant. We are signing our own fucking death warrant. That's not being racist. That's just being fucking a realist.
See, they are letting in refugees into England, and the irony is, my visa has been rejected 6 times because they think I will not be a productive member of society, where I don't need state help, where I don't need anything. I will just go there, get an education, get a job.
Yeah.
So the fact is, my visa has been rejected 6 times. I'm an educated person, right? My dad.
That's fine. Well, look,
my dad has the means to support me also. Like, if to give an argument like that, we have the means to support like me. For that matter. So, but they rejected my thing 6 times, and they gave the thing to immigrants. Like that's a very telling thing about what's going on.
Well, of course, because there's a quota system, and the quota system doesn't, you know, if the quota system is filled up with refugees or so-called refugees, most of them are just economic migrants. You know, if you actually, you know, then there aren't enough, you know, visas or permission slips to give to anyone else, right?
Yeah,
they're swamping the market. It's a marketplace, but they're getting the free ones, right? They're coming in with their coupons, right? They got a coupon, you got to pay, but the coupons go ahead of the pay. I mean, that's the kind of ridiculous position that we put ourselves in now. That's the only analogy I can think of.
See, but as I said, who has to fight for British values? The white British have to fight for their values. You have to fight for
no, this is the thing. I don't think it's a white British. I think it's anyone who actually aspires to what it is that British values are. It doesn't matter whether you're black or white or whatever. I used to know a black guy. I mean, he was black as the ace of spades. You know, he was a Nigerian guy. But my God, you know, you've never met a more British person in your life. And he certainly wasn't going to go and, you know, blow himself up and, you know, in a town centre or something. In fact, he'd be the first one down there punching the fucker in the face.
No, I don't mean.
You know?
Yeah, but what I actually mean is, like in India, the Hindus had to fight for their way of life. For 1,000 years, for 1,200 years, we had to fight for our way of life. That's how we have gotten to the place we are today. So that's how I mean that the primary responsibility to protect and safeguard British values, the majority white Christian British way of life, rests on the British. You cannot count on anybody else. You have to count on yourselves to change it. And for that, also a strong leader from within you has to come up. And Theresa May is certainly not that person.
Oh, no, Theresa May's not going to do shit.
Yeah. Neither
has.
Jeremy Corbyn. Forget Jeremy Corbyn. Let's not even discuss that guy. So,
Yeah.
so it has to be somebody from within you.
Well, no,
so
it needs to be the best person would be at the moment would be someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg. Well, it's certainly got to be someone who was a Brexiteer from the very beginning, not Boris Johnson, who just turned into one. You know, when it became tactically convenient for his his career. In fact, he was the worst person that she could have put in there because he did it. He got exactly what he was looking for. He went from being a Remainer to a Brexiteer, and then he ended up in the cabinet. So he knew damn well that that was just going to be, a career step. It's so fucking blatant. I don't understand why people still think, Boris is anything worthwhile.
See, if he can do the job for you, regardless of his personal whatever leanings, if he can do the job for you, then why not? Like, because your job is to right now, like you have to take what you get. As far as leadership goes, you have to take what you get. If you
look, you have to have somebody who believes in the mission, right? You don't want somebody who's half-assed about it. You need somebody who is actually committed to what they're saying.
And also they can't be scared of the opposition, because that's one problem that a lot of conservatives have these days, is they're scared of the opposition, of being labeled one way or another, and they won't stick to their values because of it.
Yeah, that's why I used to like Nigel Farage, because he was like really combative, and he had a personality, and he was very distinctive. Too bad he was part of the UKIP and not like a totally mainstream party. But the fact is, he had the kind of ideas which would be ideally suited for today's situation. He's like tailor-made.
Oh yeah. Yeah, but the thing is, Nigel Farage, again, this is, like I said, it's so weird with what's been going on with our politics, because as soon as he achieved his goal, he resigned. And then he came back and then he goes. I mean, he keeps doing this stuff. The guy is too flaky to be a leader.
No, it's not that he's flaky. He probably didn't see the reaction that he was hoping.
No, a leader has to commit to something, and he didn't. Right? He thought, oh, well, I've done it now, and it's almost like, actually, I've done it now. But then he slunk away. It was almost like he's ashamed of what he'd done. Now, Nigel Farage is never going to be a leader of any substance. He doesn't have the strength of his own convictions, clearly. Otherwise, he would have stayed and seen it through.
That's true. That's true.
All right, gentlemen. Do you have any final thoughts on the subject before we sign off?
No,
or we said all about we can.
Don't want to hold you up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
we bore you.
We were supposed to talk about the elections, by the way. We didn't get a chance to talk about the elections.
Oh, yeah. We kind of, a little bit, but yeah, not too much. We'll talk about that soon, all right?
Yeah, we can do it in a few days. Whatever.
Sounds good.
I had a lovely chat, though. I had a wonderful time chatting with all the different people.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. We should all come back and do it again soon.
Anytime you like.
Yeah, sounds and good. Cabbage. Wakanda forever, bro.
Yeah, well, hit me up on Discord, mate. Come into Discord.
Dude. Yeah, so what's your Discord name?
Well, same as it is here. Cabbage Patch Bastard.
Yeah, but what's the number? There's a number at the end of it, right?
Hold on, I can figure that out for you. I got Discord open.
What is my name and number? What am I fucking tattooed now? Am I a Jewish? I'm not heading. I am not going into the oven.
It's Cabbage Patch. It's Cabbage Patch Bastard number 4473.
Number 4473.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll hit you up on Discord.
All right, mate.
All right. See you.
Fantastic, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on today.
Total pleasure.
Good night. Good night.
All right. Have a great one.
Bye for now.